The February wind cut through the Colorado Rockies like a blade, carrying with it the promise of another brutal storm. Michael Thompson adjusted his heavy coat and pulled his wool hat lower over his ears as he made his way along the familiar patrol route through Yellowstone National Forest. 23 years as a forest ranger had taught him to read the signs. The way the pine needles shivered, how the snow crunched underfoot with that particular crystalline sound that meant temperatures well below freezing. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as he checked his GPS and marked another waypoint on his tablet. The preserve covered thousands of acres, and while most visitors stayed on the marked trails during warmer months, winter brought its own set of challenges. Poachers sometimes thought the cold weather provided cover for their illegal activities, and winter storms could damage infrastructure that needed immediate attention. The river beside the trail rushed with unusual vigor for this time of year. Recent snow melt from an unexpected warm spell the week before had swollen the waterway, creating dangerous currents beneath a deceptively thin layer of ice along the banks. Michael made a mental note to recommend additional warning signs for the spring hiking season. He paused to photograph a section where the ice had buckled, creating sharp ridges that could easily cut through a boot or worse, give way under someone's weight. The camera's display showed the temperature, -18 degrees Fahrenheit. Even with his insulated gloves, his fingers began to sting after just moments of exposure. As he tucked the camera back into his jacket, a sound stopped him cold. At first, he thought it might be the wind whistling through the rocky outcroppings upstream. But there was again a thin, desperate whimpering that spoke of something alive and in distress. Michael stood perfectly still, letting his ears adjust to the ambient sounds of the forest. The rushing water, the occasional crack of a branch contracting in the cold, the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Then, unmistakably, came a cry again. High-pitched, weak, but definitely from a living creature. He followed the sound, moving carefully along the icy riverbank. The whimpering grew more distinct as he approached a bend where the current had carved a deep pool. The ice here was particularly treacherous, formed in thin sheets that gleamed like black glass over the churning water beneath. There, struggling in the frigid current about 15 feet from shore, was a small gray form. At first glance, Michael thought it might be a domestic dog, perhaps some unfortunate pet that had wandered too far from a campsite. But as he watched the animal's desperate attempts to reach the bank, he recognized the distinctive pointed ears, the narrow snout, and the way it moved in the water. A wolf pup, probably no more than 3 months old, was fighting for its life against the merciless current. Michael's training kicked in immediately. His first instinct was to assess the situation. The pup was clearly exhausted, its movements becoming weaker with each passing moment. The water temperature would kill it within minutes, if drowning didn't claim it first. The ice between him and the struggling animal wouldn't support his weight, and the current was too strong for the pup to make it to shore on its own. But this was a wolf, a predator. His job as a forest ranger included protecting the ecosystem's natural balance, which sometimes meant allowing nature to take its course, even when that course seemed cruel. Wolves were protected in the area, but they were also dangerous. A rescued wolf pup could grow into a problem animal, losing its natural fear of humans and potentially becoming a threat to visitors. The whimpering grew weaker. Michael found himself moving before his rational mind could argue. He shrugged off his heavy backpack and pulled out a coil of climbing rope. Working quickly, he tied one end around a sturdy pine about 10 feet back from the water's edge. The other end he secured around his waist with a bowline knot that would hold his weight but could be quickly released if necessary. Testing the ice with his walking stick, he began to work his way toward the struggling pup. Each step sent spiderweb cracks radiating through the surface, and twice he had to redistribute his weight when the ice sagged ominously beneath him. The cold bit through his waterproof boots, and he could feel his feet beginning to lose sensation. The pup had stopped struggling, its small head barely visible above the dark water. Its eyes, a startling amber color, fixed on Michael with what looked almost like understanding. Those eyes held no aggression, only exhaustion and the kind of desperate hope that transcends species. When Michael was close enough, he lay flat on the ice to distribute his weight and reached out with his walking stick. The pup was too weak to grasp it, but the ranger managed to hook the stick under the animal's chest, just behind the front legs. Slowly, carefully, he began to pull. The ice groaned and cracked, but held. The pup offered no resistance, seeming to understand that this strange creature was trying to help. Water streamed from its thick puppy fur as Michael lifted it from the deadly current, and he could feel the animal shivering violently against the walking stick. Getting back to shore proved even more treacherous than the approach. The added weight, minimal as it was, changed the dynamics of his movement across the ice. Twice he had to stop when cracks appeared directly beneath him, waiting for the surface to stabilize before continuing. When he finally reached solid ground, Michael gently lowered the pup onto the snow-covered bank. The little animal was in bad shape, hypothermic, exhausted, and barely conscious. Its breathing was shallow and rapid, and its normally thick coat was plastered to its small body. Without hesitation, Michael opened his jacket and lifted the pup inside against his chest. The animal was surprisingly light, probably underweight for its age. Its body felt like ice against his warm clothing, but he could feel a heartbeat, rapid but steady. The nearest veterinarian was over an hour away, assuming the roads were passable. His ranger station had basic first aid supplies, but nothing designed for treating wildlife. His cabin, however, was only 20 minutes away, and it had heat, dry towels, and at least some basic medical supplies. As he packed up his gear with one arm while cradling the pup with the other, Michael couldn't help but wonder what had brought this young wolf to such a desperate situation. Pups this age rarely wandered far from their pack, and wolves were generally excellent swimmers. Had it fallen through ice upstream? Been separated from its family during a hunt gone wrong? The questions would have to wait. Right now, his focus was on getting the little animal somewhere warm and dry before hypothermia claimed it. As he began the trek back to his cabin, he felt the pup's breathing begin to slow and deepen against his chest. Whether that was a good sign or a bad one, he couldn't tell. The wind picked up again, driving snow horizontally across the trail. Michael pulled his hat down further and quickened his pace. Behind him, the river continued its relentless rush toward the valley below, indifferent to the small drama that had just played out on its banks. In his jacket, the wolf pup stirred slightly, its small paws flexing against the warmth of the ranger's chest. For the first time since he'd spotted the struggling animal, Michael allowed himself to hope that his impulsive rescue might actually succeed. The trail ahead wound upward through stands of snow-laden pines, each step taking them closer to warmth and safety. Michael had saved many animals during his career, but something about this particular rescue felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. The pup's breathing continued to stabilize, and occasionally Michael could feel it shift position slightly, as if trying to get more comfortable against his chest. Those amber eyes had closed, but the ranger could still feel the steady rhythm of a heartbeat through the animal's thin ribs. Whatever happened next, he had given this small creature a chance at survival. In the harsh calculus of wilderness life, sometimes that was the most anyone could do. The warmth of the cabin enveloped them like a gentle embrace after the brutal cold outside. Michael kicked the door shut behind him and immediately moved toward the stone fireplace, where embers from the morning's fire still glowed faintly. The pup remained motionless against his chest, its breathing shallow but steady. Working with practiced efficiency, Michael added kindling to the coals, coaxing flames back to life. The fire crackled and began throwing heat into the small living space. Only then did he carefully extract the wolf pup from inside his jacket, wrapping it immediately in a thick wool blanket he kept draped over his reading chair. The little animal's condition was worse than he had initially thought. Its fur, now beginning to dry in the warmth, revealed how thin it was. Each rib was visible beneath the coat, and its hip bones protruded sharply. This wasn't just hypothermia. This pup had been malnourished for some time. Michael placed the bundled animal on a cushion near the fire and quickly gathered supplies. From his medicine cabinet, he retrieved a thermometer, some antiseptic, and a bottle of electrolyte solution he kept for emergencies. The kitchen yielded warm milk, which he diluted with water and warmed to body temperature. The pup's temperature registered dangerously low, but it was alive and its heart rate, while rapid, seemed strong. Michael had treated hypothermic hikers before, and the principle was the same. Gradual rewarming, fluids if the patient was conscious, and careful monitoring for complications. As he worked, the ranger found himself studying the animal's features. The pup was clearly pure wolf. The ear shape, the facial structure, and even the paw size all indicated it would grow into a formidable predator. But right now, it looked impossibly fragile, its closed eyes giving it an almost peaceful expression despite the trauma it had endured. The fire began to fill the cabin with radiant heat. Michael adjusted the blanket around the pup, ensuring its extremities were covered while leaving its head free. Gradually, he noticed signs of improvement. The animal's breathing became deeper and more regular, and occasionally its ears would twitch at sounds around the cabin. When the pup finally opened its eyes, Michael was sitting cross-legged beside the cushion, reading a wildlife management manual by lamplight. Those amber eyes focused on him with startling clarity, showing none of the confusion he might have expected from a traumatized animal. Instead, there was wariness, intelligence, and something that looked remarkably like assessment. The pup made no attempt to flee, despite now having the strength to do so. It simply watched Michael with unblinking attention, occasionally shifting its position beneath the blanket, but never taking its gaze away from the human who had pulled it from the icy water. Michael moved slowly, extending his hand palm up toward the animal. The pup's nostrils flared as it caught his scent, processing the complex mixture of information that smell conveyed. After several long moments, it stretched its neck forward just enough to brush its nose against Michael's fingertips. A tentative first contact that spoke of cautious curiosity rather than fear. Hunger eventually overcame wariness. When Michael offered a small amount of the diluted milk on his finger, the pup licked it eagerly. Its tongue was rough and surprisingly warm, and the animal's tail, previously tucked tightly against its body, gave the slightest wag. Over the next several hours, Michael carefully monitored the pup's recovery. He offered small amounts of liquid every 30 minutes, gradually introducing tiny pieces of cooked chicken from his refrigerator. The animal ate with the focused intensity of something that had been genuinely hungry, but it maintained its alertness throughout, tracking Michael's movements around the cabin. As evening approached, the pup grew more active. It tested its legs, standing unsteadily at first, but quickly regaining coordination. Its first tentative steps took it not toward the door, as Michael had expected, but closer to where he sat working at his small desk. The ranger found himself talking to the animal as he completed his daily reports. The pup seemed to find his voice soothing, settling near his feet and occasionally looking up at him with those penetrating amber eyes. When Michael moved to the kitchen to prepare his own dinner, the pup followed at a respectful distance, maintaining visual contact but giving him space to work. This behavior puzzled Michael. Wild animals, even young ones, typically showed one of two responses to human contact: aggressive fear or complete withdrawal. This pup displayed neither. Instead, it seemed to be studying him, learning his patterns and routines with the focused attention of a student. The ranger's wildlife biology training provided a possible explanation. Wolf pups were naturally inclined to identify and follow pack leaders. In the absence of its natural family, the pup might be imprinting on him as a substitute parent figure. The thought was both touching and concerning. Forming such a bond would make the animal's eventual return to the wild much more complicated. As night fell, Michael prepared a makeshift bed for the pup using an old sleeping bag and several towels. He placed it near the fireplace, where the warmth would be consistent throughout the night. The pup investigated the arrangement thoroughly, circling the bedding and testing its softness before settling down with a soft sigh. But as Michael prepared for sleep himself, he noticed the animal wasn't resting. Instead, it lay with its head raised, ears pricked forward, staring intently at the cabin's windows. Occasionally, it would whine softly, not the distress sound he had heard by the river, but something more complex. Longing, perhaps, or recognition of something beyond human perception. Michael dimmed the lights and settled into his own bed, but sleep proved elusive. Every few minutes, the pup would shift position or emit another soft whine. The sound wasn't loud enough to be truly disruptive, but there was something in it that spoke of deep emotional distress. Rising quietly, Michael approached the animal's bed. The pup looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than its months would suggest. In the firelight, those amber irises held depths of understanding that made Michael wonder what the animal might be thinking. He knelt beside the makeshift bed and gently stroked the pup's head. The fur was now completely dry and surprisingly soft, with a dense undercoat that would protect it from mountain winters. Under his touch, the animal relaxed slightly, though its gaze remained fixed on the windows. The ranger found himself wondering about the pup's family. Wolf packs in this region typically consisted of a mated pair and their offspring from the current and previous years. If this pup had become separated from its pack, there were likely parents and siblings somewhere in the vast wilderness, searching and calling for their missing family member. The thought brought with it a complex mix of emotions. His rescue had saved the pup's life, but it might also have inadvertently separated it from its natural support system. Wolves were highly social creatures, and prolonged separation from the pack could be as dangerous as any physical threat. As if sensing his thoughts, the pup moved closer to Michael's hand, pressing its small head against his palm. The gesture was unmistakably affectionate, and the ranger felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. In 23 years of wildlife management, he had maintained professional distance from the animals under his protection. But something about this particular creature was breaking down those carefully constructed barriers. The fire settled lower in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind had picked up again, driving snow against the windows with a soft pattering sound. The pup's ears swiveled toward these sounds, tracking each shift in the weather with the acute senses that would serve it well in the wild. Michael remained beside the animal for nearly an hour, his presence seeming to provide the comfort it needed to finally relax. When the pup's breathing deepened in a true sleep, he carefully returned to his own bed, though he continued to listen for any sounds of distress. The last thing he remembered before drifting off was the sight of the pup curled in its makeshift bed, looking for all the world like a domestic dog rather than a wild predator. But even in sleep, its ears remained slightly alert, tuned to frequencies and meanings that existed far beyond the walls of the warm cabin. Tomorrow would bring decisions about the animal's future, but tonight, both man and wolf could rest safely beside the dying fire. Morning light filtered through the cabin's frost-covered windows, casting prismatic patterns across the wooden floor. Michael woke to the unusual sensation of being watched and opened his eyes to find the wolf pup sitting beside his bed, amber gaze fixed on his face with patient intensity. The animal had clearly been awake for some time. Its posture was alert but relaxed, tail curled neatly around its front paws in the manner of a well-behaved dog. But there was nothing domesticated about the intelligence in those eyes. They held a wildness that no amount of human contact could diminish. Michael sat up slowly, careful not to startle his unexpected companion. The pup's tail gave a tentative wag, and it stepped back to give him room to rise, but its attention never wavered from his movements. Every gesture, every change in posture was cataloged and analyzed with the focused attention of a creature learning to read an entirely new species. The morning routine that followed was unlike anything in Michael's decades of solitary living. As he moved through the cabin, starting the coffee maker and checking the fire, the pup shadowed his steps at a consistent distance of about 3 feet, close enough to maintain visual contact, far enough to avoid interfering with his activities. When Michael opened the refrigerator, the pup sat immediately, watching as he retrieved eggs and bacon for breakfast. The animal showed no begging behavior, no attempt to snatch food or demand attention. Instead, it simply observed, as if trying to understand the patterns and purposes behind human domestic activities. The ranger found himself talking to the animal as he cooked, explaining his actions in the same conversational tone he might use with a human companion. The pup's ears tracked his voice, and occasionally its head would tilt slightly, as if parsing the meaning behind unfamiliar sounds. When breakfast was ready, Michael prepared a small portion for his guest, plain scrambled eggs and small pieces of bacon, carefully removing any seasoning that might be harmful. The pup approached the offered food with dignified restraint, eating slowly and cleanly, pausing occasionally to look up at Michael as if seeking approval. After breakfast, the ranger settled at his desk to complete paperwork from the previous day's patrol. The pup explored this new arrangement, investigating the desk legs and chair before choosing a spot on the braided rug, where it could observe both Michael and the cabin's entrance. Its positioning was strategic, close enough to its human benefactor to maintain the pack bond it was clearly forming, but oriented to watch for potential threats or opportunities. Michael's work required concentration, but he found himself increasingly aware of the pup's presence. The animal's breathing, the soft sounds it made when shifting position, the almost inaudible whine that escaped when a passing cloud temporarily dimmed the sunlight streaming through the windows. All of these became part of the cabin's acoustic landscape. What struck him most was the pup's apparent contentment with simply being present. It made no demands, showed no signs of restlessness or anxiety. Instead, it seemed to be absorbing the rhythms of human life with the same attention it would give to learning the habits of prey animals or the territorial markers of rival packs. Around mid-morning, Michael received a radio call from his supervisor requesting an update on the previous day's patrol. As he responded, describing weather conditions and trail status, the pup's ears pricked forward with keen interest. The electronic voice emanating from the radio clearly puzzled the animal, and it approached the device cautiously, sniffing at the speaker with scientific curiosity. When the call ended, the pup remained near the radio for several minutes, occasionally pawing gently at the speaker as if trying to coax the mysterious voice to return. Its problem-solving approach was sophisticated, testing different angles of approach, using scent as well as sound to gather information, eventually determining that the device was not a source of immediate interest or threat. The afternoon brought an unexpected challenge. Michael needed to split firewood for the evening, a task that required him to work outside in the cold. He expected the pup to remain safely inside by the fire, but when he opened the door, the animal immediately moved to follow him. The ranger paused, considering. The pup had been through severe trauma just 24 hours earlier, and exposure to extreme cold could trigger a relapse of hypothermia. But the animal showed no signs of distress at the temperature change, and its thick coat was now fully dry and fluffed for insulation. More concerning was the possibility that once outside, the pup might bolt for the forest, driven by instincts to return to its natural habitat. Michael couldn't physically restrain a wild animal, nor would he want to try. If the pup chose to leave, he would have to respect that decision, regardless of his growing attachment to the creature. But as he stepped onto the cabin's small porch, the pup followed with calm confidence, showing no inclination to flee. Instead, it settled on the top step, position where it could watch Michael work while maintaining a clear view of the surrounding forest. Its behavior suggested not a prisoner waiting to escape, but a pack member observing the activities of its leader. The wood splitting proceeded under careful supervision. Every swing of the axe was monitored, every movement analyzed. When Michael paused to rest, the pup would approach the wood pile, sniffing at the fresh-cut timber and occasionally picking up small wood chips to examine them more closely. The animal's curiosity extended beyond mere observation. When a piece of split would rolled away from the main pile, the pup carefully carried it back, dropping it precisely where it had originated. The behavior suggested not just intelligence, but an understanding of human goals and a desire to contribute to their achievement. As the afternoon progressed, Michael became increasingly aware that he was sharing his space with a creature of remarkable adaptability. The pup had somehow bridged the vast evolutionary gap between wild predator and domestic companion, finding a behavioral middle ground that honored both its nature and its current circumstances. But perhaps most significantly, the animal showed no signs of wanting to leave. Each time a sound from the forest caught its attention, the call of a distant bird, the rustle of wind through pine branches, the pup would look toward the source with obvious interest, but always returned its focus to Michael and the immediate surroundings of the cabin. This lack of wanderlust troubled the ranger more than he cared to admit. A healthy wild animal should be driven by powerful instincts to return to its natural habitat and rejoin its species. The pup's apparent satisfaction with human companionship suggested either psychological trauma from its ordeal or a level of social bonding that could complicate any future rehabilitation efforts. As evening approached and they returned to the cabin's warmth, Michael found himself facing an uncomfortable truth. Somewhere during the past day and night, the professional distance he maintained from wildlife had completely eroded. The pup was no longer just another animal under his care. It had become something approaching a companion. The realization brought with it a host of ethical concerns. His job was to protect and preserve wild ecosystems, not to create dependencies between humans and native species. Every hour the pup remained in human contact was another hour it wasn't learning the skills necessary for survival in the wild. Yet as he watched the animal settle contentedly beside the evening fire, Michael couldn't bring himself to regret his decision to provide rescue and care. The pup was alive, healthy, and seemingly happy. For now, that had to be enough. Outside, darkness was falling across the mountain landscape, and somewhere in that vast wilderness, a wolf pack might be searching for their missing member. The thought added weight to decisions that would need to be made soon. But tonight, the cabin was warm, and both man and wolf were safe from the harsh realities waiting beyond its walls. The third night brought restlessness. Michael woke repeatedly to the sound of soft whining and the gentle scratch of claws against the wooden floor. Each time he opened his eyes, he found the wolf pup standing by the window, silhouetted against the pale moonlight filtering through the frost-covered glass. The animal's posture spoke of deep longing. Its ears were pricked forward, straining to catch sounds that existed beyond human perception. Occasionally, it would press its nose against the cold window pane, breath fogging the glass as it stared into the darkness beyond. Michael understood what he was witnessing. The pup's instinctual connection to its pack was asserting itself, drawing the animal's attention toward the wilderness where its family might be calling. Wolves communicated across vast distances through howls that could carry for miles in the thin mountain air, and the pup was clearly listening for signals that might guide it home. By morning, the animal's behavior had shifted noticeably. While it still followed Michael through his daily routines, there was a new quality of distraction in its movements. The pup would pause mid-step, head tilted toward sounds that registered only on its sensitive ears. Its meals were eaten with less enthusiasm, and it spent long periods simply sitting by the door, amber eyes fixed on the forest beyond. The ranger recognized the signs from his wildlife training. The pup was experiencing what researchers called pack anxiety, the psychological stress that social animals endured when separated from their family groups. In the wild, wolves have been observed traveling hundreds of miles to rejoin their packs, driven by bonds that transcended individual survival instincts. Michael found himself torn between competing impulses. The rational part of his mind knew that the animal's growing restlessness was a positive development, indicating that its natural instincts remained intact despite several days of human contact. But another part of him, a part he was reluctant to acknowledge, felt something approaching loss at the prospect of the pup's departure. The day passed in a strange dance of approach and withdrawal. The pup would settle near Michael for periods of apparent contentment, only to suddenly rise and return to its vigil by the windows. Its internal conflict was visible in every movement, the pull of pack bonds competing with the comfort and security of its current environment. As afternoon faded into evening, the pup's agitation increased. It began to pace a regular circuit through the cabin, pausing at each window to survey the darkening forest. The soft whining that had marked previous nights became more frequent and urgent, carrying undertones that spoke of genuine distress. Michael tried to provide comfort through his presence, sitting on the floor and allowing the pup to approach at its own pace. The animal would come close enough for physical contact, accepting gentle strokes along its head and neck, but its attention remained divided between the human beside it and the mysterious communications it sensed from the wilderness. When full darkness fell, the pup's behavior reached a new intensity. It stood at the main window, nose pressed against the glass, and released a sound that was part whine, part howl, a vocalization that seemed to be testing its own voice, perhaps preparing for the kind of long-distance communication that might reconnect it with its pack. The sound sent chills down Michael's spine, not from fear, but from recognition of its profound emotional content. This was not the cry of a domestic animal seeking attention, but the voice of a wild creature calling to its own kind across a vast and empty landscape. Around midnight, the pup made a decision that surprised the ranger. Instead of continuing its restless pacing, the animal walked deliberately to the cabin door and sat directly in front of it. There was no scratching at the wood, no demanding behavior, simply a clear, unmistakable statement of intent. Michael approached slowly, understanding that this moment represented a crucial transition. The pup looked up at him with eyes that held no trace of confusion or uncertainty. The message was clear. It was time to go home. The ranger's hand rested on the door handle for a long moment as he processed the complexity of his emotions. 3 days earlier, he had rescued a dying animal from the icy river, acting on impulse and compassion. Now he faced the inevitable consequence of that rescue, releasing his temporary companion back to a world where survival was never guaranteed. But as he looked down at the pup's patient, expectant face, Michael realized that this wasn't truly a goodbye. The animal's behavior suggested something more complex than simple departure. There was an invitation in its posture, a sense that it expected him to understand something important. With growing curiosity, Michael opened the door. Cold air rushed into the warm cabin, carrying with it the scents and sounds of the winter forest. The pup stepped onto the porch immediately, but instead of bounding away into the darkness, it stopped and turned back toward him. The animal's body language was unmistakable. It wanted him to follow. Michael stood in the doorway, rational thought warring with intuition. Every aspect of his training argued against following a wild animal into unknown territory, especially at night in sub-freezing temperatures. The wilderness was full of dangers for humans, from hidden crevasses to predators to the simple risk of becoming lost in terrain that could prove fatal to navigate in darkness. But the pup waited with patient determination, occasionally taking a few steps toward the tree line before returning its gaze to Michael's face. Its message was clear and consistent. It had something to show him, something important enough to overcome its own eagerness to rejoin its pack. The ranger found himself thinking about the animal's rescue and the days that had followed. From the beginning, the pup had displayed unusual behavior, too trusting for a wild animal, too focused on human activity, too willing to form social bonds across species lines. Perhaps there was something about its situation that he hadn't fully understood. Minutes passed as man and wolf regarded each other across the threshold between domestic safety and wild uncertainty. The pup showed no signs of impatience, but its intent remained unwavering. It had made a choice to trust the human who had saved its life, and now it was asking for that trust to be reciprocated. Finally, Michael stepped back in the cabin long enough to grab his heavy coat, emergency supplies, and a powerful flashlight. If he was going to follow this animal into the winter darkness, he would at least be prepared for whatever they might encounter. When he emerged fully equipped, the pup's tail gave a single wag of approval. It turned toward the forest with confident purpose, pausing only to ensure that Michael was following. The ranger closed the cabin door behind him and stepped off the porch into the snow-covered wilderness. The night was crystal clear, with enough starlight to illuminate the basic contours of the landscape. The pup moved with sure-footed grace across terrain that would have been treacherous for a human to navigate alone. It maintained a steady pace that Michael could match, frequently looking back to confirm his presence, but never slowing its progress toward whatever destination it had in mind. As they moved deeper into the forest, Michael found himself entering a world he had never experienced despite decades of wilderness work. This was the forest as wolves knew it, a complex landscape of scent trails, territorial markers, and communication networks that existed entirely beyond human perception. The pup navigated this invisible map with the confidence of an expert guide, leading them along paths that seemed random but clearly followed some deeper logic. The temperature continued to drop, and Michael's breath formed increasingly dense clouds in the frigid air. But the physical discomfort was overshadowed by a growing sense of anticipation. Whatever the pup wanted to show him, it had been important enough for the animal to delay its own reunion with its pack. That suggested something extraordinary waiting ahead in the darkness. Behind them, the lights of the cabin disappeared entirely, swallowed by the vast wilderness that stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. Michael was now completely dependent on his unlikely guide, trusting his safety to a creature he had known for only 3 days. The pup pressed forward with unwavering determination, leading them deeper into a mystery that would soon reshape everything the ranger thought he knew about the relationship between humans and the wild. The forest grew denser as they progressed, towering pines creating a canopy so thick that even starlight struggled to penetrate the darkness below. Michael's flashlight beam carved a narrow tunnel through the blackness, illuminating snow-covered branches and the steady form of the wolf pup moving just ahead of him. They had been walking for nearly an hour, following what appeared to be a game trail that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. The pup's navigation never faltered, though the route seemed to double back on itself at times, following elevation changes in natural corridors that only became apparent when they were directly upon them. Michael's wilderness experience told him they were moving deeper into the preserve's backcountry, territory that few humans ever visited even during favorable weather conditions. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft crunch of their footsteps in the snow and the occasional crack of a tree branch contracting in the extreme cold. The pup's behavior remained consistent throughout the journey. It would move forward for several minutes at a steady pace, then pause to ensure Michael was still following. During these stops, the animal would often lift its head and test the air, nostrils flaring as it processed scent information that painted a detailed picture of their surroundings. As they climbed a particularly steep section of trail, Michael noticed that the pup's demeanor was changing subtly. Its movements became more cautious, and it spent longer periods sampling the air. The animal was clearly approaching something significant. Whether destination or danger, the ranger couldn't determine. When they finally crested the ridge, the pup stopped completely. It stood motionless for several minutes, every muscle tense with concentration as it evaluated conditions ahead. Then, apparently satisfied with whatever it had detected, the animal looked back at Michael with an expression that seemed almost human in its complexity. The message was clear. They had arrived. The descent from the ridge led them into a small valley Michael had never seen despite years of patrolling the area. The terrain here was more sheltered, with natural windbreaks that had created a microclimate slightly warmer than the surrounding forest. Ancient pines towered overhead, their massive trunks creating cathedral-like spaces between them. The pup's pace slowed to a careful walk as they entered this hidden sanctuary. Its head moved constantly, scanning for signs that remained invisible to human senses. Michael found himself unconsciously matching the animal's cautious approach, instinctively recognizing that they were entering territory where his presence might not be welcome. They followed a frozen stream bed that wound through the valley floor, the ice beneath their feet providing treacherous footing that required careful attention. The pup navigated these conditions with ease, occasionally pausing to allow Michael to catch up when the terrain proved particularly challenging for human locomotion. After what felt like another half hour of careful progress, the pup stopped beside a massive fallen log that created a natural shelter against the hillside. The animal's posture changed dramatically, ears forward, tail slightly raised, every line of its body expressing alert excitement. Michael approached cautiously, using his flashlight to examine the area around the log. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the typical debris of a mature forest, fallen branches and accumulated leaves creating natural mulch beneath the snow cover. But as the pup moved toward a specific spot near the log's root system, the ranger began to detect signs of disturbance in the natural pattern. The snow here had been compressed and shaped by repeated use. Paths led away from the central area in multiple directions, worn by the passage of numerous feet over an extended period. Most significantly, Michael began to catch traces of a distinctive musky scent that spoke of predator presence. The pup approached the area with obvious familiarity, moving directly to a section where the fallen log created an overhang that would provide protection from wind and precipitation. As Michael followed with growing understanding, his flashlight beam revealed the unmistakable signs of an active den site. The entrance was carefully concealed beneath the log's massive root ball, creating a tunnel that led into darkness beyond the reach of his light. The ground around the opening was packed hard by constant use, and scattered around the perimeter were the remains of recent meals, bones that had been thoroughly cleaned and gnawed, evidence of a successful hunting pack. But what captured Michael's attention most powerfully was the sound that began to emerge from the depths of the den. Soft whimpering, similar to what he had heard from the pup by the river, but multiplied and harmonized into a chorus of young voices calling for attention and care. The rescued pup responded immediately, moving to the den entrance and releasing a complex vocalization that combined whine, bark, and the beginning notes of a howl. The response from within was immediate and enthusiastic, a cascade of puppy voices expressing joy, relief, and desperate hunger. Michael stood transfixed as he realized what he was witnessing. The pup hadn't simply been leading him to its pack's territory. It had brought him to its family's den, where siblings and possibly parents waited in conditions that might prove as desperate as the situation he had encountered 3 days earlier at the river. The implications hit him with stunning force. The pup's presence in the icy water hadn't been an accident or the result of youthful inexperience. It had been on a mission, searching for food for a family that might be trapped or unable to hunt effectively. Its rescue had saved one life, but potentially left others in mortal danger. As if confirming his growing understanding, the sound from within the den shifted from joyful greeting to urgent pleading. These were voices of creatures in distress, calling for help that might already be too late in coming. The rescued pup looked up at Michael with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of desperate hope. Its journey through the winter forest hadn't been a casual tour of its territory. It had been a carefully planned mission to bring help to family members who couldn't help themselves. Michael knelt beside the den entrance, playing his flashlight beam into the tunnel while trying to process the complexity of what was unfolding. Somewhere in the darkness beyond his vision, a wolf family waited for rescue that only human intervention might be able to provide. The pup pressed against his shoulder, not seeking comfort for itself, but clearly communicating that time was crucial. Whatever circumstances had trapped this family in their den, the situation had already lasted long enough to drive one young member to risk everything in search of assistance. The ranger found himself facing a decision that would challenge every protocol of his profession. Wildlife management doctrine was clear about human intervention in natural processes. Predators lived and died according to the harsh mathematics of survival, and human interference disrupted ecological balance in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. But the creature beside him had already disrupted those natural processes by forming a cross-species bond strong enough to guide a human through miles of winter wilderness to this hidden sanctuary. The pup had demonstrated intelligence, planning ability, and trust that transcended normal animal behavior. Most significantly, it had chosen to bring him here rather than simply returning to die alongside its family. Michael rose slowly, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he contemplated the weight of responsibility the pup had placed on his shoulders. Whatever lay ahead in that dark tunnel, he was no longer just a wildlife manager following established protocols. He had become part of something larger and more complex than his training had ever prepared him to handle. A story of survival that would require him to trust instincts he hadn't known he possessed and to redefine his understanding of the relationship between human compassion and natural law. The pup waited beside him with patient determination, ready to guide him into whatever darkness lay ahead. Michael knelt at the den entrance, his flashlight beam probing the tunnel that disappeared into impenetrable darkness. The sound from within had grown more urgent, soft whimpering interspersed with what seemed like attempts at communication. The rescued pup pressed close to his side, radiating tension and expectation. The ranger's wilderness training kicked in as he assessed the situation. The tunnel appeared stable, carved into earth that had been compacted by years of use and reinforced by the massive root system of the fallen pine. The entrance was wide enough for him to crawl through, though it would require removing his heavy pack and proceeding with extreme caution. The pup seemed to understand his hesitation. It moved to the tunnel entrance and looked back at Michael with unmistakable invitation, then took several steps into the darkness before returning to his side. The message was clear. The animal was willing to lead him into its family's most vulnerable space, demonstrating a level of trust that transcended normal predator-prey relationships. Michael shed his pack and retrieved a smaller flashlight from his pocket, one that would be easier to maneuver in confined spaces. He also took his emergency medical kit and a collapsible water container, supplies that might prove crucial depending on what conditions he found inside. The tunnel was longer than he had anticipated, extending perhaps 15 feet into the hillside before opening into a natural chamber carved by decades of wolf habitation. As Michael emerged into this underground sanctuary, his flashlight revealed a scene that stopped him completely. The chamber was larger than expected, roughly circular and perhaps 8 feet in diameter. The walls were lined with accumulated bedding material, dried grasses, leaves, and fur that had been gathered over multiple seasons to create insulation against the mountain cold. But it was the chamber's occupants that commanded his complete attention. 3 wolf pups, slightly smaller than his rescued companion, huddled together in the center of the space. Their eyes reflected his flashlight beam with the distinctive blue-white shine of young wolves, and their thin bodies spoke of prolonged hunger. They pressed against each other for warmth, but their weakness was evident in their labored breathing and the way they struggled to lift their heads toward the unexpected human intruder. But it was the chamber's 4th occupant that made Michael's breath catch in his throat. Against the far wall, partially concealed by the natural shadows, lay an adult wolf of magnificent proportions. Even in the dim light, her silver-gray coat was stunning, marked with darker patterns that spoke of genetic lineages stretching back thousands of years. She was trapped. Michael's flashlight revealed the cruel efficiency of the accident that had befallen the pack's matriarch. Her right hind leg was wedged between 2 large stones that had apparently shifted during recent freeze-thaw cycles, creating a gap just wide enough to trap a limb but too narrow to allow escape. The surrounding earth showed evidence of extensive digging, desperate attempts to widen the opening that had only succeeded in making the stones more tightly wedged. The wolf's golden eyes met Michael's with an expression that contained no hostility, only exhaustion and a desperate hope that seemed almost human in its intensity. She had been trapped long enough for her strength to ebb significantly, though she remained alert and protective of her offspring. The rescued pup moved immediately to its mother's side, pressing against her head and releasing soft vocalizations that carried complex emotional content. The adult wolf responded with gentle rumbles, clearly communicating with her returning offspring, while keeping her gaze fixed on the human who had accompanied him. Michael found himself part of a conversation he couldn't understand, but whose meaning was unmistakable. The pup was explaining his absence, describing the human who had rescued him from the frozen river, and conveying that this strange 2-legged creature might represent salvation for the entire family. The other 3 pups had begun to move toward Michael with cautious curiosity. Their weakness was apparent in every step, But their interest in this unprecedented visitor overcame their natural wariness. One, slightly bolder than its siblings, approached close enough to sniff at Michael's extended hand, its small nose cold and wet against his skin. The ranger remained perfectly still, allowing the young wolves to investigate him at their own pace. Their behavior suggested they had been without adequate food for an extended period, probably the entire time their mother had been trapped. The pup he had rescued had clearly been attempting to hunt for the family when it fell into the river, a task far beyond the capabilities of an animal so young. As Michael assessed the trapped wolf's condition, the complexity of the rescue became apparent. The stones that held her leg were large enough to require significant leverage to move, and the confined space of the chamber made maneuvering difficult. More challenging was the question of the wolf's reaction to human contact. Despite her current docility, she remained a powerful predator capable of inflicting serious injury if she perceived him as a threat to her offspring. But time was clearly running out. The adult wolf's breathing was labored, and her eyes held the dull quality that spoke of dehydration and exhaustion. The pups were in even worse condition, their bodies beginning to show the effects of prolonged hunger. Without intervention, the entire family would likely perish within days. The rescued pup seemed to sense Michael's analysis. It moved between the human and its trapped mother, maintaining eye contact with both, as if serving as translator for a conversation that desperately needed to happen. Its body language suggested increasing urgency. Time was running out, and decisive action was needed. Michael began speaking in the same quiet, conversational tone he had used in his cabin, though he had no idea whether wolves could process the calming intent behind human vocalizations. The trapped wolf's ears flicked toward his voice, and her breathing seemed to slow slightly, as if recognizing that the sounds carried no aggression. Moving with deliberate slowness, Michael approached the trapped leg to examine the situation more closely. The wolf remained still, though her muscles tensed with readiness to defend herself if necessary. Her paw was wedged at an angle that made extraction complex. Simply pulling would likely cause additional injury, while the stones were too tightly wedged to be easily moved. The rescued pup positioned itself where both Michael and its mother could see it clearly, then began a series of gentle whines and soft barks. The adult wolf responded with equally soft vocalizations, and Michael realized he was witnessing something extraordinary, a three-way negotiation conducted in languages he didn't understand, but whose emotional content was unmistakable. Trust was being established across species lines, mediated by a young wolf who had already learned to bridge the vast gap between human and predator consciousness. The conversation continued for several minutes, with the pup clearly advocating for the human's good intentions, while the mother evaluated this unprecedented situation with a careful judgment that had kept her family alive in one of nature's harshest environments. Finally, the adult wolf seemed to reach a decision. She relaxed slightly, allowing her head to rest more fully on the chamber floor while maintaining eye contact with Michael. Her message was clear. She was placing the survival of her family in the hands of a creature she had never encountered before, trusting in bonds that existed beyond rational understanding. Michael felt the weight of that trust settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. This magnificent creature was offering him the most precious thing she possessed: access to her vulnerable offspring and faith that his intentions were benevolent. The responsibility was overwhelming and humbling in equal measure. Working carefully in the confined space, he began to examine the trapped leg more thoroughly, looking for the safest approach to extraction. The wolf remained still under his gentle touch, though her breathing quickened with anxiety. Her leg was swollen and painful, but didn't appear to be broken, a complication that would have made rescue far more difficult. The pups watched this unprecedented interaction with fascination, apparently sensing that something momentous was taking place. Their mother was allowing a human to touch her, to examine her injury, to attempt a rescue that could mean the difference between life and death for the entire family. As Michael worked to understand the mechanics of the trap, he found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this underground chamber. 3 days earlier, he had been a wildlife ranger following established protocols and maintaining professional distance from the animals under his protection. Now he was an integral part of a wolf family's survival story, trusted with their most desperate secrets and deepest vulnerabilities. The transformation was as profound as it was unexpected, challenging everything he thought he knew about the relationship between humans and wildlife. But as he looked into the golden eyes of the trapped wolf, Michael realized that some experiences transcended professional protocols and demanded responses from deeper, more fundamental aspects of human nature. The rescue would require tools he didn't have with him, supplies from his cabin that could mean the difference between success and tragic failure. But first, he needed to ensure that this family could survive until he returned with proper equipment. The real work was just beginning. The reality of the rescue operation settled over Michael as he inventoried the limited supplies in his emergency kit. The trapped wolf watched his every movement with keen intelligence, her golden eyes tracking his hands as he examined the wedged stones and tested their stability. Her breathing had become more labored during his examination, suggesting that her condition was deteriorating rapidly. The 3 remaining pups had arranged themselves in a semicircle around their mother, their weak bodies pressed together for warmth. They observed Michael with the wide-eyed attention of creatures witnessing something beyond their experience, occasionally exchanging soft vocalizations with their rescued sibling, who seemed to be providing ongoing reassurance about the human's intentions. Michael's flashlight revealed the cruel precision of the geological trap. The 2 stones were granite boulders, each weighing several hundred pounds, positioned so that normal settling had created a gap that narrowed from top to bottom. The wolf's leg had become wedged at the narrowest point, where the combined weight of both stones created pressure that no amount of struggling could overcome. The ranger's engineering background, dormant since his college years, began to assert itself as he analyzed the problem. Simple leverage wouldn't work. There wasn't enough room in the chamber to position a fulcrum effectively, and the angle was wrong for direct force application. The solution would require either moving one of the stones completely or finding a way to lift both simultaneously while providing traction for the wolf to extract her leg. His emergency kit contained a small pry bar, originally intended for avalanche rescue, and a compact come-along winch rated for 2,000 pounds. But both tools required anchor points that didn't exist in the natural chamber, and improvising such anchors would require materials he hadn't brought. The rescued pup seemed to sense his growing concern. It moved closer to Michael, pressing its small body against his leg in a gesture that carried remarkable emotional weight. The animal had led him to its family's crisis, demonstrated unprecedented trust in bringing a human into their most sacred space, and now waited with patient hope for solutions that might be beyond even human capabilities. As Michael continued his assessment, the trapped wolf began to show signs of increasing distress. Her attempts to shift position became more frequent, and soft whines escaped her despite obvious efforts to remain stoic. The sight of her offspring in obvious need was driving her to expend energy she couldn't afford to lose. The ranger made his first critical decision. He couldn't free the wolf immediately, but he could address the family's most pressing need, food. The pups were clearly suffering from prolonged hunger, and their mother's body was beginning to consume its own muscle mass to maintain basic functions. From his pack, Michael retrieved 2 energy bars and his emergency water supply. The food wasn't ideal for wolves, but it contained calories and nutrients that could sustain life until more appropriate supplies could be obtained. Breaking the bars into small pieces, he offered them first to the weakest pup, a small female whose ribs were clearly visible beneath her thick coat. The pup approached cautiously, sniffing at the unfamiliar food before taking a tentative bite. The taste seemed acceptable, and hunger overcame wariness as she began to eat with increasing eagerness. Her siblings quickly followed, and within minutes, all 3 pups were consuming the offered nutrition with obvious relief. The rescued pup, stronger than its littermates due to its days of recovery in Michael's cabin, took a smaller portion before carrying the rest to its mother. The adult wolf accepted the food with dignified gratitude, though her condition made chewing difficult. Michael mixed some of his water supply with the remaining food, creating a slurry that would be easier for her to consume. As the immediate crisis of hunger began to ease, Michael started planning the larger rescue operation. The tools and materials he needed were back at his cabin: rope, pulleys, a portable winch, and most importantly, medical supplies adequate for treating a large animal's injuries. The round trip would take at least 4 hours, possibly longer in the treacherous night conditions. Leaving the family alone for that length of time felt like abandonment, but attempting the rescue with inadequate equipment could make their situation worse. The trapped wolf seemed to understand his dilemma. Her eyes followed him as he moved around the chamber, and when he knelt beside her to check the position of her trapped leg, she remained perfectly still, allowing him to assess the situation without resistance. The level of trust she was demonstrating went against every instinct that had kept her alive in the wilderness. Wolves were apex predators with good reason to fear humans. Yet this magnificent creature was placing her family's survival in the hands of a species that represented existential threat to her kind. The weight of that trust was both humbling and terrifying. Michael began preparing for his return journey, gathering his scattered supplies while explaining his intentions in the same quiet voice he had used throughout the encounter. Whether the wolves understood his words was irrelevant. The tone conveyed calm purpose and commitment, emotions that seemed to resonate across species barriers. The rescued pup approached as Michael prepared to leave, clearly understanding that separation was imminent. The animal's behavior had changed subtly during their time in the den. It had become more confident, more assertive, displaying leadership qualities that suggested it had assumed responsibility for its family's welfare during the crisis. When Michael moved toward the tunnel entrance, the pup followed immediately. Its intention was clear: it would guide him back to the cabin, ensuring that he could return with the supplies needed for the rescue. The other family members watched this departure with calm acceptance, as if understanding that temporary separation was necessary for long-term survival. The journey back through the winter forest was more challenging than the initial trek. Michael's awareness of the trapped family's deteriorating condition made every minute crucial, driving him to move faster than conditions safely allowed. The rescued pup maintained the steady pace that had characterized their outbound journey, but its frequent glances back toward Michael suggested it too understood the urgency of their mission. The temperature had dropped further during their time underground, and Michael's breath formed dense clouds that crystallized almost immediately in the frigid air. His flashlight beam seemed weaker than before, possibly due to battery drain from the extended use in the den, creating pools of illumination that barely extended beyond their immediate path. Despite these challenges, the pup's navigation remained flawless. It led them along the same route they had used hours earlier, avoiding the dangerous sections and maintaining steady progress toward the cabin. The animal's ability to retrace a complex path in complete darkness spoke to spatial intelligence that exceeded human capabilities by several orders of magnitude. As they climbed the final ridge before descending toward Michael's cabin, both man and wolf paused to rest. The ranger used the opportunity to check his supplies and plan the rescue operation in detail. He would need the portable winch, multiple lengths of rope, a medical kit designed for large animals, food supplies for several days, and possibly camping equipment if the rescue proved more complex than anticipated. The pup sat beside him during this brief rest, its attention divided between the human planning the rescue and the forest behind them where its family waited in desperate circumstances. The animal's patience was remarkable. Despite obvious anxiety about its trapped mother and siblings, it maintained the disciplined behavior that had made the night's journey possible. When they resumed their trek, both seemed driven by renewed urgency. The cabin's lights became visible through the trees, promising warmth, supplies, and the tools necessary to attempt something that might be impossible: freeing a trapped wolf without causing additional injury, while maintaining the trust of creatures who had every reason to fear human contact. As they approached the cabin, Michael realized that the next few hours would determine whether this extraordinary encounter between species would end in triumph or tragedy. The rescued pup had placed impossible trust in human capabilities, and now that trust would be tested against the harsh realities of physics, biology, and the limits of improvised wilderness rescue. The work ahead would challenge everything Michael thought he knew about wildlife management, human-animal relationships, and the boundaries between professional duty and personal commitment. But as he looked down at the determined young wolf beside him, he knew that retreat was no longer an option. The family in the den was depending on them both. The cabin felt almost tropical after hours in the sub-freezing forest, but Michael didn't pause to appreciate the warmth. He moved with focused efficiency, gathering equipment while the rescued pup positioned itself by the door, amber eyes tracking every preparation with intense concentration. From his storage shed, Michael retrieved the portable winch he used for fallen tree removal, along with several coils of climbing rope rated for rescue operations. A pulley system designed for backcountry emergencies would provide the mechanical advantage needed to lift the massive stones, while his veterinary first aid kit contained supplies for treating large animal injuries. The pup watched these preparations with apparent understanding, occasionally approaching items that seemed to interest it. When Michael tested the winch mechanism, the animal's ears pricked forward at the sound of clicking gears, as if memorizing details that might prove important later. Food for the wolf family required more creativity. Michael's freezer contained venison from the previous hunting season, meat that would be familiar and appealing to the trapped wolves. He packed several pounds of the frozen meat along with his camping stove, knowing that hot food would be more beneficial than frozen protein for animals in their weakened condition. As he worked, Michael found himself talking through the rescue plan with his unlikely partner. The pup seemed to listen intently, tilting its head at certain words and maintaining eye contact in a way that suggested comprehension beyond normal animal behavior. The rescue strategy was necessarily complex. The winch would need to be anchored to trees outside the den, with rope routed through the tunnel to reach the trapped stones. The angle would be challenging, requiring multiple pulleys to redirect force effectively. Most critically, the operation would need to be coordinated so that the wolf could extract her leg the moment sufficient clearance was created. Loading his pack with the accumulated supplies created a burden that would make the return journey significantly more difficult. The additional weight would slow their progress and increase the risk of accidents on treacherous terrain, but every item was essential for the rescue attempt. The pup waited patiently as Michael completed his preparations, but its body language conveyed increasing anxiety. Time was working against the trapped family, and every minute of delay reduced their chances of survival. When the ranger finally shouldered his heavy pack and moved toward the door, the animal immediately bounded outside, eager to resume their crucial mission. The return journey tested both human and wolf endurance. Michael's heavy pack made navigation more challenging, forcing him to choose routes carefully to avoid losing balance on icy surfaces. The pup adjusted its pace accordingly, frequently stopping to allow the ranger to catch up while maintaining its role as guide through the complex terrain. Despite the physical challenges, Michael found himself marveling at the unprecedented nature of their partnership. He was following a wild wolf through wilderness terrain in conditions that could easily prove fatal, carrying equipment to attempt a rescue that violated every protocol of wildlife management. Yet the relationship felt natural, as if some fundamental barrier between species had dissolved under the pressure of shared purpose. The pup's navigation remained as precise as during their initial journey, leading them along the safest routes while maintaining steady progress toward the hidden valley. Its ability to remember and follow complex paths in complete darkness suggested cognitive capabilities that challenged traditional understanding of animal intelligence. As they approached the den site, both seemed to sense the weight of the moment ahead. The rescue attempt would either free the trapped wolf or potentially make her situation worse. There would be no middle ground, success or failure, with a family's survival hanging in the balance. The pup's behavior became more cautious as they neared the fallen log that concealed the den entrance. It tested the air frequently, reading sent messages that provided information about conditions inside. When they finally reached the familiar landmark, the animal paused and looked back at Michael with an expression that seemed to convey both hope and trepidation. Sound from within the den were weaker than before, soft whimpering that spoke of declining strength among the trapped family. The adult wolf's responses to her pup's arrival calls were noticeably less vigorous, suggesting that her condition had deteriorated during their absence. Michael shed his pack and began organizing equipment for the rescue attempt. The winch needed to be positioned where it could generate maximum force while remaining accessible for operation. Trees suitable for anchoring were abundant, but finding the right angle would require careful calculation. The rescued pup disappeared into the tunnel immediately, clearly eager to reunite with its family and assess their condition. Soft vocalizations from within suggested emotional reunions, but also conveyed information about the urgent need for action. Working in the beam of his headlamp, Michael began installing the rescue system. The primary anchor was a massive pine about 20 feet from the den entrance, large enough to resist the forces that would be generated during extraction. Secondary anchors distributed the load while allowing for directional changes in the rope system. The most challenging aspect was routing rope through the narrow tunnel to reach the trapped stones. The confined space made maneuvering difficult, and the rope needed to be positioned precisely to avoid interfering with the wolf's extraction once clearance was created. As Michael worked his way through the tunnel with rope and pulleys, he found the den's atmosphere had changed markedly. The rescued pup had clearly communicated that help was arriving, and all 4 family members watched his preparations with intense attention. Even the weakest pups seemed more alert, as if drawing energy from renewed hope. The trapped wolf's condition was visibly worse than during his earlier visit. Her breathing was more labored, and her responses to stimuli were slower. Dehydration and exhaustion were taking their toll, making rapid extraction crucial for her survival. Michael positioned himself where he could work on the stone trap while maintaining visual contact with the wolf. Her golden eyes followed his movements with calm intelligence, and she made no protest when he began testing rope positions around the crushing stones. Her trust remained absolute despite obvious pain and weakness. The engineering challenge was more complex than he had anticipated. The stones were wedged at multiple points, requiring careful sequencing to create clearance without causing collapse. The rope angles needed constant adjustment, and the limited space made tool manipulation extremely difficult. Throughout the preparation, the pup maintained its role as intermediary between human and wolf, positioning itself where both could see it clearly while providing what seemed like ongoing translation of intentions and procedures. Its presence appeared to calm both its mother and the human working to free her. When the rope system was finally configured correctly, Michael tested the mechanism carefully. The winch responded smoothly, generating forces that caused minute shifts in stone position. But the critical moment was approaching, the actual extraction attempt that would determine whether weeks of planning and hours of preparation would result in freedom or disaster. The rescued pup seemed to sense the approaching climax. It moved closer to its mother, pressing against her head while keeping its eyes fixed on Michael's face. The message was clear. They were ready, trusting completely in human capabilities and commitment. Michael positioned his hand on the winch handle, knowing that the next few minutes would define the outcome of one of the most extraordinary rescue attempts he had ever undertaken. Everything depended on precise timing, mechanical advantage, and the continued cooperation of creatures who had placed their lives in his hands. The moment of truth had arrived. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he gripped the winch handle, the weight of the moment settling over him like a physical burden. The trapped wolf watched him with those luminous golden eyes, her breathing shallow but steady. Around her, the three weakened pups had arranged themselves in a protective semicircle, while their rescued sibling maintained its position as intermediary between human and wolf. The first test of the system required delicate pressure, just enough to determine if the stones would respond to mechanical advantage without creating dangerous shifts that could worsen the trap. Michael applied gradual force to the winch handle, feeling resistance build through the rope system as tension transferred to the wedge boulders. A grinding sound echoed through the chamber as granite surfaces shifted against each other, accompanied by the sharp crack of small stone fragments breaking away under pressure. The trapped wolf's ears flattened momentarily at the unfamiliar sounds, but she remained motionless, seeming to understand that these mechanical noises represented potential freedom. Michael paused, studying the configuration carefully. The primary boulder had moved perhaps half an inch, creating a barely perceptible widening in the gap that held the wolf's leg. But the secondary stone had settled deeper, partially negating the gained clearance. The physics were more complex than anticipated. Relieving pressure at one point was creating new compression at another. The rescued pup moved closer to its mother, pressing against her shoulder while maintaining eye contact with Michael. Its message was clear: continue, regardless of the uncertainty. The family had endured days of trapped desperation, and any chance at freedom was worth the risks involved. Adjusting his approach, Michael began applying force in measured increments, watching carefully for signs that the stone arrangement was becoming unstable. Each click of the winch mechanism produced minute changes in boulder position, requiring constant evaluation to ensure progress rather than deterioration. The wolf's trapped leg showed swelling that had increased during their absence from the den. The extended pressure was causing tissue damage that would require immediate treatment once extraction was achieved. But first, the mechanical liberation had to succeed without causing additional injury through hasty or poorly coordinated efforts. 20 minutes of patient adjustment finally produced meaningful results. The primary boulder had shifted enough to create visible clearance around the trapped limb. though extraction would still require precise coordination between human mechanical assistance and wolf muscle power. The critical moment was approaching, the point at which the wolf would need to contribute her own strength to achieve freedom. Michael positioned himself where he could operate the winch while maintaining visual contact with the trapped animal. Her condition had deteriorated further during the extraction process, with obvious exhaustion making communication more difficult. But her eyes remained alert, tracking his movements with intelligent understanding of the approaching climax. The pups sensed the building tension, their soft whimpering taking on new urgency as they pressed closer to their mother. The rescued pup moved to a position where it could see both the mechanical operation and its mother's face, clearly preparing to facilitate communication at the crucial moment. Michael began the final sequence, applying steady pressure to the winch while speaking in calm, encouraging tones. The wolf seemed to understand that her participation was needed. As the boulder shifted and clearance increased, she began testing her trapped leg, exploring the limits of newly available space. The breakthrough came suddenly. With a grinding rumble that filled the chamber, the primary boulder shifted enough to release the crushing pressure that had held the wolf's leg for days. She immediately began working her limb free, pulling with careful determination while Michael maintained winch pressure to prevent the stone from settling back into its original position. Her leg emerged inch by inch, revealing the extent of damage caused by prolonged compression. The fur was matted with dried blood, and severe swelling distorted the normal contours of muscle and bone. But the limb appeared intact. No obvious fractures or tears that would prevent eventual recovery. The moment of complete liberation was marked by a sound Michael would never forget. A deep, resonant exhale that seemed to carry weeks of pent-up stress and pain. The wolf's entire body relaxed as the crushing pressure finally ended, though she was too weak to attempt standing immediately. Her pups responded to their mother's freedom with excited whimpering and gentle nuzzling, pressing against her in a display of affection that transcended species barriers. The rescued pup moved to Michael, brushing against his leg in what could only be interpreted as gratitude, before returning to participate in the family reunion. But celebration was premature. The extracted leg was severely injured, and the wolf's overall condition remained critical. Days of immobilization and stress had depleted her strength to dangerous levels, while her offspring were still suffering from prolonged hunger. The mechanical rescue was complete, but medical treatment was just beginning. Michael carefully examined the injured limb, noting areas of deep bruising and tissue damage. The wolf tolerated his touch with remarkable patience, seeming to understand that human contact was necessary for her recovery. Her breathing remained labored, and her responses to stimuli were slower than normal, indicating exhaustion that bordered on complete system collapse. From his veterinary kit, Michael retrieved antiseptic solution and bandaging materials. The wounds needed cleaning and protection to prevent infection, while the severely swollen tissues required support to prevent further damage. Working by flashlight in the confined space, he began the delicate process of field treatment for injuries that would challenge a fully equipped veterinary clinic. The wolf remained perfectly still during this medical attention, though her muscles tensed with obvious pain when antiseptic contacted open wounds. Her eyes never left Michael's face, maintaining the extraordinary trust that had made the entire rescue possible. Occasionally, she would glance toward her offspring, as if ensuring they were safe while she endured necessary treatment. The bandaging process required creativity in the confined space, with limited materials and no proper restraint for a large predator. But the wolf's cooperation was complete. She seemed to understand that temporary discomfort was essential for long-term recovery. Her intelligence was remarkable, demonstrating problem-solving abilities that challenged conventional understanding of animal cognition. As medical treatment progressed, Michael became increasingly aware that the family's needs extended far beyond immediate injury care. They would require food, water, and continued medical attention for days or possibly weeks. The den site was isolated and difficult to access with supplies, while moving the family to more convenient locations could prove impossible given the wolf's condition. The rescued pup seemed to sense his growing concern about long-term care logistics. It moved between Michael and its mother with increasing frequency, as if trying to facilitate communication about challenges that existed beyond the immediate medical crisis. Its behavior suggested awareness that freedom from a stone trap was only the first step in a complex recovery process. Michael's examination revealed the full extent of the wolf's injuries. Severe bruising that extended from her trapped leg into her hip and lower back, indicating tissue damage from days of abnormal positioning. She would likely be unable to walk normally for weeks, making hunting impossible and leaving the family dependent on external food sources. The ethical implications of this dependency troubled Michael even as he worked to address immediate medical needs. Creating wildlife dependence on human assistance violated fundamental principles of conservation biology, potentially disrupting natural behavioral patterns in ways that could prove harmful to the entire ecosystem. But abandoning the family after their rescue would be both cruel and impractical. They had already formed bonds that transcended normal predator-prey relationships. As he completed the bandaging process, Michael found himself committed to a path that would require weeks of careful attention and resource allocation. The Wolf family had placed absolute trust in his capabilities, and that trust carried obligations that extended far beyond the immediate rescue operation. The pups watched these medical procedures with fascination, occasionally approaching close enough to sniff at unfamiliar supplies and equipment. Their behavior suggested curiosity rather than fear, indicating adaptation to human presence that was both remarkable and concerning from a wildlife management perspective. When medical treatment was finally complete, Michael turned his attention to the family's immediate nutritional needs. The venison he had brought was still frozen, requiring preparation before it could be safely consumed by weakened animals. Working with his portable camping stove, he began the process of creating warm, easily digestible meals that would provide necessary calories without overwhelming compromised digestive systems. The aroma of cooking meat produced immediate responses from all 5 wolves. Even the injured mother lifted her head with renewed interest, while the pups became increasingly active as they associated the unfamiliar sounds and smells with approaching nourishment. Their reactions provided clear evidence of how desperately they needed proper nutrition. As food preparation continued, Michael realized that the night's work had fundamentally changed his relationship with the wilderness he had sworn to protect. He was no longer simply a guardian maintaining professional distance from wildlife populations. He had become an integral part of a wolf family survival story, trusted with their most vulnerable secrets and deepest needs. The transformation was both humbling and terrifying, opening questions about the boundaries between conservation and intervention that would challenge everything he thought he knew about wildlife management ethics. The venison simmered over Michael's compact camping stove, filling the den with rich aromas that spoke directly to predator instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. The wolf pups had arranged themselves in a semicircle around the cooking area, their amber eyes reflecting the small flame as they watched this unprecedented display of human food preparation in their most sacred space. Their injured mother remained where Michael had left her after completing medical treatment, but her attention was completely focused on the cooking process. Despite her weakness, she held her head upright with obvious effort, nostrils flaring as she analyzed the complex scent messages that accompanied the warming meat. Michael worked carefully to prepare portions appropriate for animals in their weakened condition. Small pieces that could be easily consumed without requiring the tearing and chewing that might prove too taxing for their depleted energy reserves. The meat needed to be warm enough to be appealing and digestible, but not so hot as to cause burns to sensitive mouths. The rescued pup maintained its role as intermediary throughout this process, positioning itself where it could observe both the cooking operation and its family's reactions. Its behavior suggested ongoing translation of human intentions, providing reassurance that these strange activities were beneficial rather than threatening. When the first portions were ready, Michael offered them to the weakest pup, the small female whose ribs had been clearly visible beneath her coat. She approached cautiously, sniffing at the warm meat before taking a tentative bite. The taste and texture were clearly familiar and welcome. Her tail began wagging slowly as she consumed the offered food with increasing enthusiasm. Her siblings quickly followed, and within minutes, all three pups were eating with the focused intensity of creatures who had been genuinely hungry for far too long. Their bodies seemed to relax as proper nutrition began reaching their systems, providing energy that had been desperately needed for basic survival functions. The injured mother proved more challenging to feed. Her position made reaching the offered food difficult, and her weakness made chewing exhausting. Michael solved this problem by creating a nutritious broth, mixing warm water with small pieces of meat to create a liquid that could be consumed with minimal effort. Getting the wolf to accept this feeding assistance required patience and trust from both species. Michael positioned a small bowl within her reach, then sat back to allow her to approach at her own pace. The process took nearly 20 minutes, with the wolf carefully evaluating each sip while maintaining constant awareness of her offspring's safety. As the family's immediate hunger began to ease, Michael found himself observing behaviors he had never witnessed in wild wolves. The pups showed no aggression toward each other despite their desperate hunger, instead waiting patiently for their turns and ensuring that all family members received adequate nutrition. Their social structure remained intact despite the trauma they had endured. More remarkably, all 5 wolves had integrated his presence into their family dynamic without apparent stress. He was neither ignored as irrelevant nor treated as a threat requiring constant vigilance. Instead, he had somehow become accepted as a beneficial pack member whose contributions were valued and whose presence was welcome. This acceptance challenged everything Michael understood about wolf behavior and human-wildlife relationships. These animals should have been displaying wariness, aggression, or flight responses to sustained human contact. Instead, they demonstrated cooperation and trust that suggested cognitive flexibility beyond normal animal parameters. The rescued pup's behavior was particularly fascinating. It had clearly assumed leadership responsibilities during the family crisis, making decisions that had ultimately saved all their lives. Its initiative in seeking human assistance represented problem-solving abilities that challenged conventional understanding of animal intelligence and planning capacity. As the evening progressed, Michael began planning the logistics of extended care that would be necessary for the family's recovery. The injured mother would require daily medical attention for at least 2 weeks, along with continued nutritional support until she regained the strength necessary for independent hunting. The pups, while in better condition than their mother, would need supplemental feeding until family dynamics returned to normal. The den site's remote location made these care requirements extremely challenging. Multiple daily trips would be necessary, each requiring several hours of difficult travel through terrain that could prove hazardous in winter conditions. Weather was an additional concern. Storms could make access impossible for days at a time, potentially interrupting critical care during the most vulnerable period of recovery. Alternative arrangements seemed impractical or impossible. Moving the family to more accessible locations would require transportation of injured and weakened animals across terrain that could prove fatal in their current condition. Temporary captivity violated both legal regulations and ethical principles that governed wildlife management in protected areas. The rescued pup seemed to sense Michael's growing concern about long-term logistics. It approached him directly, pressing against his leg in a gesture that had become familiar during their brief partnership. Its amber eyes held an expression that seemed almost human in its complexity, gratitude mixed with understanding of challenges that lay ahead. Michael found himself talking through the care plan with his unlikely advisor, explaining the requirements and constraints in the same conversational tone he had used throughout their association. The pup listened intently, occasionally tilting its head at specific words or phrases, maintaining eye contact that suggested comprehension beyond normal animal parameters. The conversation was interrupted by sounds from deeper in the chamber, soft whimpering that indicated one of the pups was experiencing distress. Investigation revealed that the smallest male was showing signs of digestive upset, likely from consuming food too quickly after prolonged hunger. The condition was not immediately dangerous, but it required monitoring and possible intervention. Treating digestive problems in wild wolves presented challenges that would have been complex even in a fully equipped veterinary facility. Michael's field medical kit contained basic supplies, but nothing specifically designed for managing gastrointestinal distress in large predators. Improvisation would be necessary, drawing on principles from human and domestic animal medicine, while hoping that basic physiology would prove similar across species. The affected pup accepted medical attention with the same remarkable trust that his family had shown throughout the rescue process. Michael was able to administer appropriate treatments while the animal remained calm and cooperative, behavior that would have been impossible without the extraordinary bond that had developed between human and wolf. As medical treatment proceeded, Michael became increasingly aware that he was practicing veterinary medicine without proper training, equipment, or legal authority. Wildlife rehabilitation required permits and certifications that he didn't possess, while his actions could potentially be viewed as illegal wildlife harassment under federal protection statutes. But abandoning the family at this point would likely result in their deaths, making legal considerations secondary to immediate survival needs. The wolves had placed absolute trust in his abilities, and that trust carried moral obligations that transcended regulatory frameworks designed for normal human-wildlife interactions. The night was advancing rapidly, and Michael faced difficult decisions about his own immediate needs. Remaining with the wolf family would provide security and immediate response capability if medical emergencies arose, but it would also mean spending extended time in conditions that could prove dangerous for human survival. His camping equipment was minimal, designed for emergency shelter rather than extended outdoor living in sub-freezing temperatures. The den provided protection from wind and precipitation, but the temperature inside was barely above freezing, requiring careful management of body heat to avoid hypothermia. The wolf family seemed to sense his deliberations about staying or leaving. The injured mother watched him with obvious attention as he examined his limited camping supplies, while the pups positioned themselves where they could observe his activities. Their behavior suggested hope that he would remain, providing continued security during their most vulnerable hours. The rescued pup made the decision easier by settling beside Michael's sleeping bag and clearly indicating its intention to remain close throughout the night. Its message was unmistakable. The family viewed him as an integral part of their pack structure, with responsibilities and privileges that included shared sleeping arrangements. As Michael prepared his minimal camping setup within the den chamber, he reflected on the extraordinary series of events that had brought him to this moment. 3 days earlier, he had been a wildlife ranger following established protocols and maintaining professional distance from the animals under his protection. Now he was sharing sleeping space with a wolf pack, accepted as a family member in circumstances that challenged every assumption about human-animal relationships. The transformation was both humbling and exhilarating, opening possibilities for interspecies cooperation that existed far beyond the boundaries of conventional wildlife management. But it also carried responsibilities that would test his capabilities and commitment in ways he was only beginning to understand. Outside the den, winter winds were increasing, carrying with them the promise of weather that could trap them all in the underground chamber for days. But inside, surrounded by the gentle breathing of sleeping wolves, Michael felt a sense of purpose and belonging that transcended any challenges that lay ahead. The night would be long and cold, but for the first time since the rescue began, all 6 inhabitants of the den, 5 wolves and 1 human, could rest with confidence that they were safe, warm, and together. Dawn filtered weakly through the den entrance, carrying with it the crisp silence that follows heavy snowfall. Michael woke to find himself surrounded by warm wolf bodies that had unconsciously arranged themselves to share heat during the coldest hours of the night. The injured mother lay closest to him, her breathing steady but labored, while the 4 pups formed a semicircle that included the human as a natural part of their sleeping pack. The rescued pup was the first to stir, lifting its head to test the morning air with sensitive nostrils. Its ears swiveled toward sounds from outside the den. The soft patter of snow settling on branches, the distant call of a hawk, and beneath it all, something that made the young wolf's entire body go rigid with attention. Michael felt the change immediately. The relaxed atmosphere of the night dissolved as all 5 wolves became alert simultaneously, their heads turning toward the den entrance with focused intensity. Whatever they were detecting existed beyond human sensory capabilities, but their coordinated response suggested something significant was approaching. The injured mother attempted to rise, supporting herself on 3 legs while favoring the bandaged limb that Michael had treated the night before. Her golden eyes held a mixture of protectiveness and concern as she positioned herself between her offspring and the tunnel entrance. Despite her weakness, she was preparing to defend her family against whatever threat she sensed approaching. Michael reached for his flashlight and moved carefully toward the entrance tunnel, trying to avoid sudden movements that might increase the wolves' anxiety. As he approached the opening, he began to hear what had captured their attention. Voices carrying through the morning stillness, human voices speaking in urgent, professional tones. The realization hit him with stunning force. A search party was approaching the valley, probably responding to his absence from scheduled radio contact. His supervisor would have initiated search protocols when he failed to report in, dispatching rangers to check his last known location and follow any trails that might indicate his whereabouts. The implications were staggering. Discovery of the wolf family would trigger wildlife management protocols that could separate him from the animals he had sworn to protect. Worse, the wolves' unusually trusting behavior toward humans might be interpreted as evidence of habituation, potentially resulting in relocation or even euthanasia decisions made in the name of public safety. The rescued pup moved to Michael's side, clearly sensing the human's distress. Its amber eyes reflected understanding that went beyond normal animal cognition, as if it recognized that the approaching voices represented a threat to the unprecedented partnership they had formed. Michael's mind raced through possible responses. He could emerge from the den and attempt to redirect the search party away from the Wolf family's location. But doing so would require explanations for his presence that could expose the entire rescue operation. Alternatively, he could remain hidden and hope the searchers would pass by without detecting the den site. But that strategy risked his own safety if they were conducting a serious missing person operation. The voices were getting closer, accompanied by the sounds of people moving through the forest with purpose and urgency. Michael could distinguish at least 3 different speakers, suggesting a substantial search effort that would be difficult to avoid or redirect. Time was running out for any decision that might protect both his own safety and the Wolf family security. The injured mother had somehow managed to stand despite her weakness, positioning herself in the classic defensive posture that wolves adopted when protecting their young. Her lips pulled back slightly to reveal impressive canine teeth, while her hackles rose in preparation for confrontation. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying, a reminder that despite their trust in him, these were still wild predators capable of inflicting serious damage when threatened. The pups responded to their mother's defensive stance by pressing closer together, but their eyes remained fixed on Michael rather than the tunnel entrance. They seemed to be looking to him for guidance, as if expecting their human pack member to provide solutions that their mother's aggression could not achieve. Michael made his decision quickly. Moving to the injured wolf's side, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder while speaking in the calming tones that had served them throughout the rescue process. Her muscles were rigid with tension, but she didn't pull away from his touch, instead looking at him with eyes that seemed to be asking for reassurance that her family would remain safe. The approaching voices had reached the fallen log that concealed the den entrance. Michael could hear boots crunching in snow directly above them, accompanied by radio chatter that confirmed this was an official search operation. Someone was calling his name, the sound echoing through the forest with professional urgency. For several long minutes, the search team remained in the immediate area, their voices indicating thorough examination of the terrain around the fallen log. Michael held his breath while maintaining gentle contact with the wolf mother, who had somehow managed to suppress her defensive instincts in response to his calming presence. The pups remained motionless throughout this tense period, their natural instincts to hide from human presence conflicting with their growing trust in the particular human who shared their den. The rescued pup stayed closest to Michael, its body pressed against his leg in a gesture that spoke of absolute faith in his ability to navigate this crisis. Eventually, the voices began to fade as the search party moved away from the den site, their conversations indicating plans to check other areas of the valley before returning to base. But their presence had fundamentally changed the dynamics of the situation. Michael was now officially a missing person, and continued searches would inevitably return to areas where his tracks might be discovered. The immediate crisis had passed, but larger challenges were becoming apparent. Extended absence from his official duties would trigger increasingly intensive search efforts, potentially involving helicopters, tracking dogs, and large numbers of personnel who would thoroughly comb every inch of the preserve. Maintaining secrecy about the wolf family's location would become increasingly difficult as search intensity increased. More immediately, the injured mother's attempt to stand had reopened wounds that Michael had carefully treated the night before. Fresh blood was seeping through the bandages, and her breathing had become more labored from the exertion of preparing to defend her family. Medical attention was needed urgently, but her elevated stress levels would make treatment more challenging than during their previous cooperative interactions. Michael approached the medical crisis with the same patient methodology that had characterized all his interactions with the Wolf family. Speaking in quiet, reassuring tones, he helped the mother settle back into a comfortable position while examining the extent of damage to her injured leg. The wounds were not life-threatening, but they represented setbacks in healing that would prolong her recovery period. More concerning was evidence that her attempts at weight-bearing had caused additional soft tissue damage, potentially complicating future mobility even after the original injuries healed. Cleaning and re-bandaging the wounds required supplies from Michael's medical kit that were already running low after the initial treatment session. He was facing the reality that extended care for the Wolf family would require resources beyond what his emergency supplies could provide, necessitating trips to his cabin that would increase the risk of detection. The pups watched this medical treatment with the same fascination they had shown previously, but their behavior reflected the tension that had permeated the den since the searchers' approach. They remained closer to their mother than before, occasionally glancing toward the tunnel entrance as if expecting further intrusions into their sanctuary. As Michael worked to address the medical setbacks, he found himself planning responses to increasingly complex logistics challenges. The search for his whereabouts would intensify with each passing hour, making movement between the den and his cabin increasingly dangerous. Weather patterns suggested that major storms were approaching, potentially trapping them all in the underground chamber for extended periods. Most significantly, the Wolf family's growing dependence on human care was creating ethical dilemmas that challenged fundamental principles of wildlife management. Their trust in him was absolute, but that trust was preventing them from developing the self-reliant skills that would be necessary for long-term survival in the wild. The rescued pup seemed to sense the growing complexity of their situation. It moved between Michael and its family members with increasing frequency, as if trying to maintain connections that were becoming strained by circumstances beyond anyone's control. As morning progressed and the search party's voices faded completely into the distance, Michael realized that the next few days would determine whether their extraordinary interspecies partnership could survive the pressures of external scrutiny and internal doubt. The Wolf family had placed absolute trust in his ability to protect and care for them. Now that trust would be tested against challenges that might prove beyond human capabilities to resolve. Outside the den, snow continued falling steadily, adding another layer of complexity to decisions that were already stretching the boundaries of what seemed possible. The morning's crisis had passed, but its aftermath settled over the den like a heavy blanket of uncertainty. Michael completed the re-bandaging of the mother wolf's leg while processing the reality that their hidden sanctuary was no longer truly safe from discovery. The search party's proximity had been a stark reminder that his absence from normal duties would trigger increasingly intensive efforts to locate him. The injured wolf seemed to sense his troubled thoughts. As he finished securing the fresh bandages around her swollen leg, she lifted her massive head and regarded him with those penetrating golden eyes. There was something almost human in her expression, a recognition of shared concern that transcended species barriers. Her 3 weakened pups had arranged themselves around her protectively, while the rescued pup maintained its position as intermediary between the human and wolf portions of their unusual pack. The family dynamic had evolved over the past few days and is something unprecedented in Michael's experience. A genuine interspecies social unit based on mutual trust and shared survival needs. But the approaching search efforts threatened to destroy this fragile partnership before it could fully develop. Discovery would mean separation, with Michael facing disciplinary action for unauthorized wildlife contact and the wolves potentially being relocated or worse. The thought of armed rangers entering this peaceful sanctuary filled him with protective instincts he hadn't known he possessed. The mother wolf's condition remained precarious despite his medical interventions. Her breathing was still labored, and the stress of preparing to defend her family had clearly set back her recovery. She needed rest, proper nutrition, and continued medical care, requirements that would be difficult to meet if they were forced to relocate to avoid human detection. Michael found himself studying the den's layout with new eyes, assessing its potential for concealment versus accessibility for ongoing care. The tunnel entrance was well hidden beneath the massive fallen log, but repeated human traffic would eventually create tracks and scent trails that trained searchers would inevitably detect. The location that had seemed perfect for emergency shelter was proving inadequate for extended occupation. The rescued pup approached him as he pondered these logistical challenges, pressing its small body against his leg in the gesture that had become their standard form of communication. Its amber eyes held an intelligence that continued to astonish him. The animal seemed to understand that their situation had become more complex and dangerous since the morning's intrusion. Food supplies were becoming another pressing concern. The venison he had brought was nearly depleted, and the family's nutritional needs were substantial. The mother required easily digestible proteins to support healing, while the pups needed consistent calories to regain strength lost during their ordeal. Hunting expeditions to replenish supplies would require leaving the family alone for extended periods, risking both their safety and potential discovery by search teams. Weather conditions added another layer of complexity to their situation. The snow that had been falling steadily since dawn was accumulating rapidly, creating drifts that would make travel increasingly difficult. Heavy snowfall could provide cover for his movements by obscuring tracks, but it would also make emergency evacuation impossible if medical crises arose. The mother wolf shifted position carefully, testing her injured leg while avoiding movements that might aggravate her wounds. Her determination to remain mobile despite obvious pain spoke to protective instincts that drove her to maintain readiness for threats to her offspring. But Michael could see that her strength was limited. She would be unable to defend the family effectively if serious danger materialized. As afternoon approached, the den's atmosphere grew increasingly tense. All 5 wolves were exhibiting heightened alertness, their ears constantly swiveling towards sounds from outside, while their nostrils tested air currents for scent messages that might indicate approaching threats. Their collective anxiety was palpable, creating an environment of constant vigilance that prevented proper rest. Michael realized that his presence, initially welcomed as salvation, was becoming a source of stress for the family. His human scent marked the den as a location of species contact, potentially attracting attention from other predators or territorial wolves who might view such mixing as threatening. The very bond that had made their rescue possible was now endangering the family he had worked so hard to save. The ethical implications of this realization were staggering. His intervention had saved lives, but it had also created dependencies and vulnerabilities that might prove more dangerous than the original crisis. The wolves were losing their natural wariness of humans, developing behavioral patterns that could prove fatal if they encountered less benevolent members of a species. Yet abandoning them now would be both cruel and impractical. The mother's injuries made independent survival impossible, while the pups were still too weak to support extended travel or hunting expeditions. They needed continued care, but that care was creating risks that challenged the fundamental goals of wildlife preservation. The rescued pup seemed to sense his growing internal conflict. It moved between Michael and its family with increasing frequency, as if trying to maintain bonds that external pressures were threatening to fracture. Its behavior suggested understanding that their unusual partnership was under stress from forces beyond the den's protective walls. Radio chatter from outside indicated that search efforts were intensifying. Michael could hear helicopter engines in the distance, aircraft that would be equipped with thermal imaging capable of detecting body heat signatures even through substantial ground cover. The den's protection was primarily visual. It would provide little concealment from technology designed to locate missing persons in wilderness environments. The sound of aircraft engines produced immediate responses from all 5 wolves. Their ears flattened against their heads while their bodies pressed closer to the earth, instinctively seeking to minimize their profiles against potential aerial threats. The mother wolf's breathing became more rapid, and Michael could see her struggling between protective instincts and the weakness that made aggressive responses impossible. Managing the family's stress while addressing his own growing anxiety required emotional control that Michael found increasingly difficult to maintain. The wolves looked to him for reassurance and guidance, but he was operating far beyond the boundaries of his training and experience. Every decision carried potential consequences that could prove fatal for creatures who had placed absolute trust in his judgment. As evening approached, Michael faced impossible choices about their immediate future. Remaining in the den provided security and allowed continued medical care for the injured mother, but it also increased the risk of discovery as search efforts intensified. Moving to a more remote location might provide better concealment, but it could prove fatal for a wolf who was barely able to stand. The pups had grown quieter as the day progressed, their earlier playfulness replaced by the subdued behavior of animals sensing adult anxiety. They stayed close to their mother while maintaining visual contact with Michael, clearly understanding that their safety depended on cooperation between the 2 species represented in their pack. Weather conditions outside were deteriorating rapidly. Wind speeds were increasing, driving snow horizontally across the landscape and creating whiteout conditions that would make travel extremely hazardous for humans while providing perfect concealment from aerial surveillance. The storm might offer opportunities for relocation that wouldn't exist under clear skies. But moving the wolf family in blizzard conditions would require preparation and equipment that Michael didn't possess. The mother would need to be transported rather than walking on her injured leg, while the pups would require protection from wind and cold that could prove fatal to animals in their weakened condition. The rescued pup approached him again as he weighed these impossible alternatives, its expression holding depths of understanding that seemed to transcend normal animal consciousness. Those amber eyes reflected intelligence, trust, and something that looked remarkably like hope. Faith that their human pack member would find solutions to challenges that appeared insurmountable. As darkness fell and the storm intensified outside, Michael realized that the next few hours would determine whether their extraordinary partnership could survive the convergence of natural and human threats that were closing in around their hidden sanctuary. The wolves had given him their complete trust. Now, that trust would be tested against circumstances that might prove beyond anyone's ability to control. The blizzard that had been building throughout the day reached its full fury as night fell, transforming the forest into a white void where visibility dropped to mere feet. Inside the den, the sound of wind howling through the trees created a constant background roar that masked other noises but also prevented detection of approaching threats. Michael sat beside the injured wolf mother, monitoring her condition while wrestling with decisions that seemed to offer no good outcomes. The storm provided perfect cover for movement, but attempting to relocate the family in these conditions could prove fatal. Yet remaining in place meant inevitable discovery once weather cleared and search efforts resumed with renewed intensity. The wolf family had settled into positions that reflected their growing stress. The 3 weaker pups pressed close to their mother, seeking comfort from her presence despite her own obvious vulnerability. The rescued pup maintained its vigil near Michael, serving as a bridge between human and wolf anxiety while clearly sharing both. Radio transmissions from search teams had ceased several hours earlier, indicating that even professional rescue operations had suspended activities due to dangerous weather conditions. The temporary respite from external pressure allowed Michael to focus on immediate medical needs, but also provided time for deeper contemplation of their impossible situation. The mother wolf's injuries were showing signs of improvement despite the morning setbacks. Her breathing had stabilized, and she was able to shift positions with less obvious discomfort. But her overall strength remained critically low, and Michael's examination revealed evidence of infection beginning to develop in the deepest wounds despite his preventive treatments. Treating infection in a wild wolf with limited medical supplies presented challenges that would have been complex even in a fully equipped veterinary facility. His antibiotic supplies were nearly exhausted, and the specialized treatments that might be necessary were simply unavailable in wilderness conditions. The infection could prove fatal if it spread to her bloodstream, making aggressive intervention essential despite the risks involved. The rescued pup watched Michael's medical procedures with intense attention, as if trying to understand the complex relationship between human actions and wolf welfare. Its intelligence was remarkable. The animal seemed to grasp that certain human behaviors were beneficial while others were neutral, developing discrimination abilities that challenged conventional understanding of animal cognition. As Michael worked to address the infection concerns, he became increasingly aware that he was practicing medicine at the very limits of his capabilities. Wildlife veterinary care required training and equipment that he simply didn't possess, yet abandoning treatment would likely result in the death of a creature who had placed absolute trust in his abilities. The ethical weight of this responsibility was becoming overwhelming. Every medical decision carried potential consequences that could prove fatal, while his lack of proper qualifications made even successful treatments legally questionable. He was operating in a gray area between emergency care and unauthorized medical practice that could have serious professional repercussions. But the alternative to continued treatment was unthinkable. The wolf mother's golden eyes held such trust and hope that abandoning her would represent a betrayal of bonds that transcended professional protocols. Her family had accepted him as a pack member with all the responsibilities that such membership entailed. The pup's behavior was evolving in ways that both fascinated and concerned Michael. They were becoming increasingly comfortable with human presence, approaching him for comfort when their mother was unable to provide reassurance. This habituation to human contact was exactly the outcome that wildlife management protocols were designed to prevent. Wild animals who lost their natural fear of humans became dangerous to both species. Wolves could attack people who seemed threatening, while humans might approach wolves without understanding the risks involved. The behavioral changes he was observing could have long-term consequences that extended far beyond this particular family. Yet the alternative to continued contact was separation that could prove fatal for animals who had become dependent on human care. Michael found himself trapped between competing ethical obligations, protecting wildlife independence versus preserving individual lives that had become intertwined with his own. The storm outside was intensifying further, with wind gusts that shook even the massive trees surrounding their shelter. Snow was beginning to drift through the den entrance despite the protection provided by the fallen log, creating miniature drifts that sparkled in his flashlight beam like scattered diamonds. Temperature inside the chamber was dropping as the storm drew heat away from their shelter. Michael's camping equipment was adequate for emergency situations, but not designed for extended occupation in severe weather conditions. Hypothermia was becoming a real concern, particularly for the weakened wolves whose energy reserves were already compromised. The family seemed to sense the increasing cold, and began adjusting their positions to share body heat more effectively. The mother wolf, despite her injuries, positioned herself to provide maximum warmth for her offspring, while the rescued pup moved closer to Michael, clearly offering to share warmth with their human pack member. This gesture of interspecies cooperation touched Michael profoundly. The young wolf was demonstrating care and consideration that went beyond simple self-preservation, actively working to ensure the survival of all pack members regardless of species. The behavior suggested social intelligence that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness and empathy. As the night progressed, Michael found himself facing a crisis of confidence about their survival prospects. Food supplies were nearly exhausted, medical resources were running low, and weather conditions were preventing any possibility of resupply. The storm that had provided temporary concealment from searchers was becoming a threat as serious as human detection. The mother wolf seemed to sense his growing despair. Despite her weakness, she lifted her head and made eye contact with expressions that seemed to convey both gratitude and encouragement. Her message was unmistakable. Regardless of outcomes, she appreciated his efforts and trusted his judgment about their collective future. The rescued pup pressed closer to Michael's side as his emotional state became more turbulent. The animal's presence was remarkably comforting, providing emotional support that transcended species barriers. Its steady breathing and warm body heat created a bubble of calm within the storm of uncertainty that surrounded them. Michael began talking quietly to his wolf companions, explaining their situation and the challenges they faced in terms that probably meant nothing to them, but helped clarify his own thinking. The sound of human voice seemed to calm the entire family, creating an atmosphere of shared purpose despite their desperate circumstances. The conversation was interrupted by sounds from outside that cut through even the storm's intensity, the distinctive howling that marked long-distance wolf communication. The calls were coming from multiple directions, suggesting the presence of other wolf packs in the area who were using the storm's cover for activities that normally occurred under darkness. The response from within the den was immediate and dramatic. All 5 wolves became intensely alert, their ears straining to decode messages carried by those distant voices. The mother wolf attempted to rise despite her injuries, clearly recognizing something in the howls that held significance beyond simple territorial marking. Michael realized he was witnessing communications within a social network that extended far beyond the immediate family. The howls were conveying information about territorial boundaries, pack locations, and possibly the unusual circumstances that had brought human and wolf together in their hidden sanctuary. The rescued pup began responding to the distant calls with vocalizations of its own, soft whines and barely audible howls that seemed to be providing information about their situation. Michael couldn't understand the content of these communications, but their emotional intensity suggested messages of desperate importance were being exchanged. As the wolf communications continued throughout the night, Michael began to understand that their isolation was not as complete as he had believed. They were part of a larger community of intelligent creatures who were aware of their situation and possibly working to provide assistance in ways that existed beyond human comprehension. The realization brought both hope and trepidation. Help might be available from sources he had never considered, but that help could also bring complications that would challenge his ability to protect the family that had come to depend on him. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault on the forest, while distant voices carried messages that spoke of connections extending far beyond the walls of their temporary sanctuary. The distant howling ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the den wrapped in the storm's muffled silence. But the wolf family's behavior indicated that significant communications had occurred. Messages had been received, information had been exchanged, and decisions had been made within networks that remained invisible to human understanding. Michael watched as the mother wolf settled back into her resting position with obvious relief. Her golden eyes held a new quality of calm that suggested the distant voices had brought reassurance rather than additional concerns. Whatever she had heard in those wild communications had apparently provided comfort that her current circumstances were understood and supported by the broader wolf community. The rescued pup moved to its mother's side, pressing against her neck in a gesture that seemed to combine affection with information sharing. Soft vocalizations passed between them, quiet sounds that carried emotional content beyond Michael's ability to interpret. But the overall atmosphere in the den had shifted from anxiety to something approaching anticipation. As the night progressed, Michael began to notice subtle changes in the family's behavior patterns. The pups were more alert despite their weakness, frequently testing the air and exchanging glances that suggested shared knowledge about developing situations. Their mother maintained her position, but showed increased responsiveness to sounds from outside that remained below the threshold of human perception. The storm was beginning to moderate slightly, though snow continued falling heavily enough to maintain concealment from any search efforts that might resume once weather conditions improved. Wind speeds were decreasing, allowing sound from the forest to penetrate their shelter more clearly. Michael found himself straining to hear whatever signals were capturing the wolves' attention. Around midnight, the first concrete evidence of external assistance became apparent. The rescued pup suddenly moved to the tunnel entrance, ears pricked forward with intense concentration. Its body language suggested recognition of specific sounds or scents that held positive significance rather than threats to their safety. Michael followed the pup to the entrance, where his flashlight beam revealed fresh tracks in the snow outside the fallen log. The prints were unmistakably wolf, large adult paws that had approached their shelter within the past hour. But there were no signs of aggression or territorial marking. Instead, the tracks suggested careful investigation followed by deliberate placement of objects near the den entrance. Investigating more carefully, Michael discovered that their mysterious visitor had left gifts, portions of fresh meat that were still warm despite the freezing temperatures. The offerings were substantial, representing successful hunting that would provide crucial nutrition for the recovering family. Someone from the local wolf community was providing practical assistance in their time of need. The rescued pup confirmed Michael's interpretation by moving immediately to retrieve the offered food, carrying it into the chamber with obvious familiarity with such arrangements. This wasn't the first time external assistance had been provided. The behavior patterns suggested established protocols for supporting pack members in crisis situations. The mother wolf accepted the fresh meat with dignified gratitude, though her weakness made consumption slow and careful. Her offspring shared the meal with the same cooperative behavior they had shown throughout their ordeal, ensuring that all family members received adequate nutrition despite their desperate circumstances. Michael found himself deeply moved by this demonstration of interspecies cooperation. The local wolf community had somehow assessed their situation and determined that the human presence was beneficial rather than threatening. They were providing support for the unprecedented partnership that had developed within the den walls. But this assistance also brought new responsibilities and concerns. Accepting help from wild wolves deepened his integration into their social networks in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. He was becoming not just a temporary caregiver, but an acknowledged member of a community that extended far beyond the immediate family. The implications for his future relationships with wildlife were staggering. Traditional boundaries between human and animal communities were dissolving, replaced by cooperative arrangements that challenged fundamental assumptions about species isolation. He was participating in something unprecedented in his experience: genuine partnership between predator and prey species based on mutual benefit and shared survival needs. As dawn approached, the evidence of external support continued to accumulate. Additional food deliveries appeared outside the den entrance, along with materials that seemed specifically chosen to address their current needs: dry grasses that would improve bedding comfort, and medicinal plants that indigenous peoples had traditionally used for treating injuries. The rescued pup served as intermediary for these exchanges, apparently communicating with the external providers about specific requirements within the den. Its intelligence and initiative were remarkable, demonstrating problem-solving abilities that included understanding human needs as well as wolf requirements. Michael's medical examination of the mother wolf revealed significant improvement in her condition. The infection that had been developing in her wounds was showing signs of regression, possibly due to compounds in the medicinal plants that had been provided. Her breathing was stronger, and she was able to support more weight on her injured leg. The pups were also showing obvious benefits from improved nutrition and reduced stress. Their energy levels were increasing, and they were beginning to display more normal, playful behaviors despite their continued weakness. The family dynamic was stabilizing as immediate survival concerns diminished. But perhaps most significantly, the atmosphere within the den had transformed from desperate crisis management to something approaching normal family life. The wolves were relaxing into patterns of rest, feeding, and social interaction that reflected confidence in their security and future prospects. Michael realized that he had become part of something larger than a simple rescue operation. The wolf community had evaluated his intentions and capabilities, then made collective decisions to support an interspecies partnership that served their interests as well as his own. He was no longer an outsider providing emergency assistance, but an integrated member of an extended pack structure. The responsibilities that came with this acceptance were both humbling and daunting. Wolf communities operated according to social rules and obligations that he only dimly understood, yet his behavior would be judged by standards that had evolved over thousands of years of pack cooperation. As morning light began filtering through the storm clouds, Michael contemplated the extraordinary transformation that had occurred over the past week. He had entered the wilderness as a human wildlife manager following established protocols. He was emerging as something entirely new, a bridge between species communities that had traditionally existed in separation or conflict. The rescued pup pressed against his leg in the gesture that had become their standard communication method. Its amber eyes held depths of understanding that seemed to acknowledge the significance of what they had accomplished together. The bond between them had transcended normal predator-prey relationships, creating possibilities for cooperation that neither species had previously imagined. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to clear, revealing a landscape transformed by heavy snowfall. The world beyond their shelter looked different, cleaner, brighter, and somehow more hopeful than the harsh environment that had existed before their underground partnership had developed. The mother wolf lifted her head and looked toward the entrance with obvious longing. Her injuries were healing, her strength was returning, and her family was safe. Soon they would need to make decisions about their future that would determine whether their extraordinary partnership could survive beyond the crisis that had created it. But for now, in the gentle light of dawn filtering through their shelter, 6 unlikely companions, 5 wolves and 1 human, could rest together in the knowledge that they had discovered something precious and rare in the harsh wilderness that surrounded them. The boundaries between species had proven more permeable than anyone had imagined, and the possibilities that lay ahead seemed as limitless as the snow-covered forest that stretched beyond their temporary sanctuary. The morning brought a clarity to the air that spoke of weather systems moving on, leaving behind a landscape transformed by the night's heavy snowfall. Michael emerged from the den tunnel to find the forest wrapped in pristine white, with drifts reaching nearly to his waist in the protected areas beneath the massive pines. The storm had accomplished what he had desperately hoped for: complete obliteration of human tracks and scent trails that might have led searchers to their hidden sanctuary. The snow had also concealed the evidence of wolf activity around the den entrance, creating a clean slate that would make future detection much more difficult. But the clearing weather also meant that search operations would resume within hours, probably with increased intensity after the enforced delay. Helicopter overflights would return, accompanied by ground teams equipped with tracking dogs whose sensitive noses might detect traces that visual inspection would miss. Inside the den, the wolf family was stirring with obvious signs of renewed energy. The mother wolf had managed to stand on her own for the first time since the rescue, testing her injured leg with careful weight-bearing that suggested significant improvement in her condition. The infection that had threatened to complicate her recovery showed clear signs of regression, aided by whatever medicinal properties the mysterious plant deliveries had contained. The three pups displayed energy levels that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. They engaged in brief play sessions that demonstrated returning strength, while their appetites had increased to the point where the family's food requirements were becoming substantial. The regular deliveries from other pack members had provided adequate nutrition, but the logistics of feeding 6 large predators would become increasingly complex as their conditions improved. Michael found himself contemplating the practical challenges of their evolving situation with growing concern. Success in treating the immediate crisis had created new problems that might prove even more difficult to resolve. The wolves were recovering their strength and natural behaviors, but they had also developed dependencies on human care that violated fundamental principles of wildlife management. The rescued pup continued to serve as intermediary between Michael and the rest of the family, but its behavior was showing signs of internal conflict. The animal was torn between its natural wolf instincts and the human bonds that had become integral to its survival strategy. This psychological division could have long-term consequences that extended far beyond their current circumstances. As Michael conducted his morning medical examination of the mother wolf, he was struck by the remarkable nature of her recovery. Her wounds were healing faster than he would have thought possible, aided by both his treatments and whatever natural remedies the wolf community had provided. Her golden eyes held renewed vitality, and her responses to stimuli were becoming more typical of a healthy predator. But her improved condition also meant that she would soon be capable of independent survival, raising questions about the future of their unprecedented partnership. Wildlife protocol demanded that recovered animals be released back to natural behaviors as quickly as possible. Yet the bonds that had formed between species seemed to transcend normal rehabilitation guidelines. The pups were also approaching the point where continued human contact could prove more harmful than beneficial. Their natural wariness of humans was being replaced by trust and dependency that could prove fatal if they encountered less benevolent members of a species. The window for returning them to normal wild behavior was rapidly closing. External assistance from the wolf community had been crucial for their survival, but it had also demonstrated the existence of social networks and communication systems that operated far beyond human understanding. Michael realized that he had been accepted into arrangements that carried obligations and expectations he was only beginning to comprehend. The sounds of helicopter engines in the distance announced the resumption of search operations with the clearing weather. The aircraft were still several valleys away, but their systematic search pattern would eventually bring them to the area around the den. Concealment strategies that had worked during the storm would prove inadequate against thermal imaging and coordinated ground operations. Michael made the difficult decision to begin preparing the family for potential relocation to more remote areas that would provide better long-term security. The mother wolf was now strong enough to travel short distances, while the pups could manage limited mobility if the pace was kept modest and frequent rest stops were provided. But moving the family would require abandoning the security and comfort of their established den, exposing them to weather risks and potential conflict with territorial wolves who might view their movement as intrusion. The logistics of such relocation were complex, requiring careful planning and resources that Michael wasn't certain he could provide. The rescued pup seemed to sense his growing concern about their future prospects. It approached him with a direct gaze that had become their standard form of communication, pressing against his leg while maintaining eye contact that seemed to convey understanding of the challenges they faced together. Michael found himself talking through the relocation options with his wolf companions, explaining the constraints and possibilities in terms that probably meant nothing to them, but helped clarify his own thinking. The family listened with the same attention they had shown throughout their partnership, occasionally exchanging glances that suggested their own internal communications about developing situations. The helicopter's sounds were growing closer, accompanied by radio chatter that indicated systematic grid searches covering increasingly large areas. The search teams were being thorough and professional, which meant that discovery was becoming more likely with each passing hour. As Michael weighed immediate relocation against continued concealment, he became aware of subtle changes in the behavior of all 5 wolves. They were exhibiting heightened alertness that went beyond normal responses to aircraft noise, their ears tracking sounds and movements that remained below his threshold of detection. The rescued pup moved to the tunnel entrance with obvious purpose, its body language suggesting recognition of something significant approaching their location. Michael followed, wondering if external wolf assistance was arriving to help with evacuation or if human searchers had somehow located their sanctuary despite the storm's concealment. What he discovered outside the den entrance challenged his understanding of wolf social organization and intelligence. 3 adult wolves were positioned at respectful distances around the fallen log, their posture indicating neither aggression nor submission, but something approaching formal communication protocol. The largest of the 3, a magnificent male with silver-gray coat markings, stepped forward and made direct eye contact with Michael. The message conveyed by that gaze was unmistakable. This was an alpha animal who had come to assess the unprecedented situation that had developed within his territory. The rescued pup immediately moved to a position between Michael and the visiting alpha, clearly serving as translator for communications that transcended normal species boundaries. Soft vocalizations passed between the wolves, while the alpha's attention remained fixed on the human who had become integrated into local pack dynamics. Michael remained perfectly still, understanding intuitively that he was being evaluated according to criteria that had evolved over thousands of years of wolf social interaction. His actions during the rescue and recovery period were being judged by standards that went far beyond simple predator-prey relationships. The evaluation continued for several minutes, with the alpha testing Michael's responses to various approaches and postures. The other 2 wolves maintained their positions while observing these interactions with obvious interest in the outcomes being determined. Finally, the alpha seemed to reach conclusions about Michael's status and intentions. The great wolf's posture relaxed slightly, and he emitted a low rumble that sounded almost like approval. The message was clear: the human had been assessed and found acceptable as a temporary member of the extended pack community. But the alpha's subsequent behavior indicated that decisions had been made about the family's future that went beyond Michael's control or understanding. The three visiting wolves began moving in coordinated patterns that suggested preparation for group travel, while their vocalizations seemed to be providing instructions about timing and procedures. The rescued pup responded immediately to these communications, moving back into the den with obvious excitement. Its behavior suggested that rescue operations were being implemented by the wolf community, arrangements that would ensure the family's safety while addressing the growing risks of human detection. Michael realized that he was witnessing the implementation of social support systems that operated according to rules and procedures that existed far beyond human knowledge. The wolf community had evaluated their situation, made collective decisions about appropriate responses, and was now implementing solutions that would serve everyone's interests. The implications were both humbling and exhilarating. He had been accepted not just as a temporary caregiver, but as a legitimate member of a social network that transcended species boundaries. The bonds formed during the rescue had created obligations and opportunities that extended far beyond anything in his previous experience. As preparations for evacuation continued around him, Michael contemplated the extraordinary transformation that had occurred over the past week. The simple act of pulling a drowning pup from an icy river had led to partnerships and understandings that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationships between human and animal communities. The future remained uncertain, but it was filled with possibilities that seemed as vast and untamed as the wilderness that surrounded their temporary sanctuary. The evacuation proceeded with efficiency that demonstrated sophisticated planning capabilities within the wolf community. The three visiting adults had obviously coordinated their approach well in advance, arriving with clear understanding of the den's layout, the family's condition, and the optimal timing for safe relocation. Michael watched in fascination as the rescued pup served as communication coordinator between the human and wolf portions of the operation. The young animal moved fluidly between species, translating intentions and concerns through body language and vocalizations that seemed to carry specific meaning for all participants. The mother wolf's response to the arrival of outside assistance was remarkable. Despite her weakened condition, she immediately began preparing for travel, testing her injured leg and organizing her offspring with the decisive behavior of an experienced pack leader. Her recovery had progressed to the point where she could assume active responsibility for family welfare, reducing her dependence on human care. The three pups showed mixed reactions to the evacuation preparations. They were clearly excited by the prospect of leaving their underground confinement, but they also displayed anxiety about separation from the human who had become integral to their survival. Their behavioral conflicts reflected the complex psychological impacts of extended interspecies contact. The alpha male positioned himself where he could observe both Michael's reactions and the family's preparations, clearly monitoring the unprecedented situation with careful attention to details that might affect pack security. His presence brought an air of authority that transformed the den from a desperate refuge into an organized staging area for coordinated movement. Michael found himself relegated to observer status as wolf social protocols took precedence over human planning. The efficiency of their arrangements was impressive, demonstrating organizational capabilities that rivaled human emergency response systems in their sophistication and effectiveness. But his observer role also provided opportunities to study wolf behavior patterns that few humans had ever witnessed. The communications between pack members involved complex combinations of vocalizations, body language, and scent marking that conveyed detailed information about routes, timing, and safety considerations. The helicopter's sounds were growing steadily closer, adding urgency to evacuation preparations that had already been proceeding with remarkable speed. The visiting wolves seemed well aware of the approaching human search efforts, adjusting their timeline accordingly while maintaining calm efficiency that prevented panic among the family members. As preparations neared completion, the alpha male approached Michael directly, making eye contact with an intensity that seemed to penetrate beyond surface communications. The message conveyed by that gaze was complex: gratitude for services rendered, acceptance of ongoing partnership, and clear expectations about future behavior within pack social structures. Michael felt the weight of obligations being transferred to him through that direct gaze. He was no longer just a human who had helped wolves in crisis. He had become something approaching a pack member with responsibilities and privileges that extended far beyond the immediate situation. The rescued pup pressed against Michael's leg one final time before joining the evacuation formation. Its amber eyes held depths of emotion that seemed to acknowledge the significance of their partnership while accepting the necessity of temporary separation. The bond between them had transcended normal human-animal relationships, creating connections that would persist regardless of physical distance. The evacuation itself proceeded with military precision. The alpha male took point position, testing routes and monitoring for potential threats, while the two subordinate adults flanked the family group. The mother wolf managed her injured leg with careful determination, while her offspring maintained formation discipline that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of group travel protocols. Michael followed at the rear of the procession, his role clearly defined as backup support rather than primary leadership. The arrangement reflected wolf social hierarchies while acknowledging his contributions to family welfare during their crisis period. The route selected by the wolf guides avoided areas where human search efforts were concentrated, following terrain features that provided natural concealment while accommodating the mother wolf's limited mobility. Their navigation was flawless, demonstrating intimate knowledge of the landscape that exceeded anything in Michael's professional experience. The helicopter's sounds grew more distant as they moved deeper into wilderness areas that were inaccessible to ground search teams. The relocation strategy was providing exactly the security that Michael had hoped to achieve, but through methods and resources that existed entirely outside his original planning. As they traveled, Michael became increasingly aware that he was participating in social arrangements that challenged fundamental assumptions about species relationships. The clear acceptance of his presence within pack structures suggested recognition of cooperative possibilities that traditional wildlife management had never considered. The rescued pup maintained its position as intermediary throughout the journey, frequently checking on both Michael's welfare and the family's progress. Its behavior demonstrated remarkable social intelligence, showing awareness of complex relationships that required ongoing attention and facilitation. After several hours of careful travel, the procession arrived at a destination that exceeded Michael's most optimistic expectations. The new location was a natural shelter formed by massive boulder formations, providing protection from weather while offering multiple escape routes if threats materialized. But more significantly, the site was already occupied by an extended community of wolves who had obviously been prepared for their arrival. The family was welcomed with greeting ceremonies that demonstrated social bonds extending far beyond immediate pack relationships. Michael found himself accepted into arrangements that resembled village life more than simple predator social organization. Individual wolves approached him with careful curiosity, testing his scent and reactions while clearly evaluating his suitability for community membership. The rescued pup served as his advocate throughout these introductions, apparently explaining his role in family rescue and ongoing welfare contributions. The young wolf's advocacy was remarkably effective. Michael's acceptance by community members seemed to increase with each explanation provided by his original partner. As evening approached, the scope of Wolf's social organization became increasingly apparent. The community operated according to sophisticated protocols that governed everything from territory usage to resource distribution. Michael was observing civilization in its most fundamental form, cooperative arrangements that ensured survival and prosperity for all participants. The mother wolf's integration into community life proceeded smoothly, with other adults immediately providing support for her continued recovery. Medical attention was available from wolves who seemed to possess extensive knowledge of natural healing methods, while her offspring were welcomed into play groups that would facilitate their social development. Michael realized that the crisis that had brought him into contact with the wolf family had actually been resolved by community resources that existed far beyond his individual capabilities. His role had been to provide bridge services during the critical period when traditional pack support systems couldn't address immediate needs. But his continued presence within community structures suggested recognition that interspecies cooperation offered benefits that justified ongoing partnership arrangements. The wolves were apparently willing to experiment with relationships that transcended traditional boundaries between human and animal societies. As night fell over their new sanctuary, Michael contemplated the extraordinary week that had transformed him from wildlife manager into active participant in interspecies community building. The journey that had begun with a drowning pup had led to discoveries about cooperative possibilities that challenged everything he thought he knew about human-animal relationships. The rescued pup settled beside him as community activities wound down for the night, its presence providing continuity between their original partnership and the expanded social network that was developing around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight Michael could rest surrounded by the gentle sounds of a community that had accepted him as a contributing member rather than an outside observer. The boundaries between human and animal societies had proven more permeable than anyone had imagined, opening possibilities for cooperation that seemed as unlimited as the wilderness that surrounded their growing partnership. Dawn in the wolf community brought rituals and activities that revealed the depth of social organization within what Michael had always considered a simple predator species. The settlement stirred to life with coordinated efficiency as different pack members assumed responsibilities for hunting, den maintenance, and offspring supervision that demonstrated sophisticated division of labor. Michael woke to find himself integrated into daily routines without conscious planning or formal assignment. The rescued pup had positioned itself as his permanent liaison, facilitating communications and ensuring his participation in community activities. His status appeared to be somewhere between guest and provisional member, with ongoing evaluation determining his long-term role. The mother wolf's recovery had accelerated dramatically with access to community medical knowledge and resources. Other wolves with apparent healing expertise had provided treatments that complemented Michael's earlier interventions, creating a comprehensive care program that addressed both physical and psychological aspects of her trauma. Her offspring were thriving in the social environment provided by community life. The three pups had been absorbed into play groups with other young wolves, learning social skills and hunting techniques that would be essential for their development. The community structure was providing educational opportunities that no individual family could have offered alone. But Michael's observations were revealing aspects of wolf society that challenged conventional scientific understanding of animal behavior. The community operated according to decision-making processes that included consultation, consensus building, and long-term planning capabilities that approached human governmental systems in their sophistication. Territory management was particularly impressive, with different pack groups maintaining overlapping ranges through negotiated agreements rather than simple territorial aggression. Resource distribution followed protocols that ensured adequate nutrition for all community members while maintaining sustainable pressure on prey populations. Most remarkably, the community was demonstrating technological capabilities that included tool usage, environmental modification, and what appeared to be primitive agriculture in the form of deliberate plant cultivation for medicinal purposes. Michael was witnessing cultural development that existed entirely outside human knowledge or documentation. The rescued pup continued to serve as his primary guide and advocate within community structures, but its role was evolving as his acceptance increased. The young wolf was becoming less translator and more collaborative partner, working with Michael to develop hybrid approaches that combined human and wolf capabilities. These collaborative projects included improvements to shelter construction that incorporated human engineering principles with wolf environmental knowledge. The results were structures that provided better protection from weather while maintaining the mobility and concealment characteristics that wolves required for security. Food preservation techniques were another area of productive cooperation. Michael's knowledge of meat preservation combined with wolf understanding of optimal storage locations to create systems that could maintain nutritional resources through extended periods of scarcity. But perhaps most significantly, they were developing communication protocols that allowed increasingly complex information exchange between species. The process required patience and creativity from both participants, but the results suggested possibilities for interspecies cooperation that transcended simple coexistence. As days passed, Michael's professional concerns about wildlife habituation began to fade in the face of evidence that the community was not becoming dependent on human assistance. Instead, they were incorporating selected human capabilities into existing social structures in ways that enhanced rather than replaced traditional skills. The wolves maintained their hunting proficiency and territorial awareness, while adding problem-solving approaches that expanded their adaptive capabilities. They were demonstrating cultural evolution in real time, developing new strategies without abandoning successful traditional methods. Michael's own transformation was equally dramatic. His understanding of wildlife behavior had been fundamentally altered by direct participation in animal society. The professional distance that had characterized his career was being replaced by personal investment in community welfare that went far beyond normal conservation responsibilities. The rescued pup had grown noticeably during their time together, developing from a desperate youngster into a confident juvenile with obvious leadership potential. Its unique experience bridging human and wolf societies was preparing it for roles that would likely extend far beyond traditional pack hierarchies. Their partnership had evolved into something approaching friendship, with complex emotional bonds that transcended the species barriers Michael had once considered absolute. The relationship was providing insights into animal consciousness and intelligence that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of interspecies understanding. Community acceptance of their partnership was facilitating experiments in cooperation that were producing unexpected benefits for all participants. Human planning capabilities combined with wolf sensory awareness to create surveillance and security systems that neither species could have developed independently. Resource management was another area of productive collaboration. Michael's knowledge of seasonal patterns and long-term climate trends complemented wolf understanding of local environmental changes to create more effective strategies for dealing with resource scarcity and habitat modification. The community was also developing protocols for managing contact with other human populations, recognizing that their expanded capabilities might eventually require interaction with ranger services and wildlife management agencies. These preparations suggested sophisticated understanding of human social systems and potential conflict scenarios. As Michael's integration into community life deepened, he began to understand that he was participating in something historically unprecedented: the voluntary formation of a genuinely integrated interspecies society based on mutual benefit rather than dominance relationships. The implications of such integration extended far beyond their immediate community. If successful, their experiment could serve as a model for human-wildlife relationships that transcended traditional conservation approaches. The possibilities for ecosystem management and environmental protection seemed limitless if similar cooperation could be established with other species and communities. But success would require continued adaptation from all participants, as the challenges of maintaining interspecies cooperation were ongoing rather than solved by initial acceptance. Cultural differences, communication barriers, and conflicting survival priorities would require constant attention and negotiation. The rescued pup pressed against Michael's side as evening approached, its presence providing continuity between their original partnership and the expanded community relationships that were developing around them. The bond between them remained central to his successful integration into wolf society, serving as foundation for broader cooperative arrangements. As night fell over their thriving community, Michael reflected on the remarkable journey that had begun with a simple rescue and evolved into something that challenged the boundaries between human and animal societies. The future remained uncertain, but it was filled with cooperative possibilities that seemed as vast as the wilderness that surrounded their unprecedented experiment in interspecies community building. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight he could rest surrounded by the sounds of society that had found ways to bridge the ancient gaps between species while honoring the distinctive contributions that each brought to their shared survival efforts. The mother wolf's complete recovery marked a turning point in the community's daily rhythms. Michael watched with profound satisfaction as she joined the morning hunt patrols, moving with the fluid grace that characterized healthy predators in their natural environment. Her injured leg showed no signs of permanent damage, testament to the effectiveness of combined human and wolf medical interventions. Her return to active participation in community life shifted family dynamics in ways that were both predictable and surprising. The three pups who had depended entirely on outside assistance during their crisis now followed their mother with renewed confidence, learning hunting techniques and social behaviors that would prepare them for independent adult lives. But the rescued pup's relationship with its mother had been fundamentally altered by their shared experiences during the crisis. The young wolf had assumed leadership responsibilities that typically wouldn't develop until much later in its maturation process, creating a complex dynamic between traditional pack hierarchy and emergency forged partnerships. Michael observed these family adjustments with the fascination of someone witnessing evolutionary processes in real time. The crisis had accelerated normal development patterns, producing behavioral adaptations that might persist throughout the animal's lives. The rescued pup would likely never fit completely into traditional wolf social structures, having developed capabilities that transcended normal pack roles. The community's acceptance of Michael had stabilized into something resembling permanent membership, with clearly defined roles and responsibilities that complemented rather than competed with wolf capabilities. His contributions to shelter construction, food preservation, and security planning were valued and integrated into community operations without disrupting traditional hierarchies. Most significantly, his partnership with the rescued pup had become a recognized social institution within the community. Other wolves acknowledged their unique relationship, incorporating their collaborative capabilities into group planning while respecting the special bonds that had developed between them. This recognition was creating opportunities for other interspecies partnerships within the community. Michael noticed that several adult wolves were beginning to engage in sustained interactions with him, testing possibilities for cooperative arrangements that went beyond simple tolerance of human presence. The implications of these developing relationships extended far beyond immediate community welfare. If multiple human-wolf partnerships could be successfully established, the potential for expanding interspecies cooperation seemed limitless. Entire ecosystems could be managed through collaborative approaches that honored both human planning capabilities and animal environmental knowledge. But such expansion would require careful attention to maintaining the balance between cooperation and independence that had made their initial partnership successful. The wolves needed to retain their essential wildness while incorporating human capabilities that enhanced rather than replaced their natural skills. Michael's own professional development was undergoing equally dramatic transformation. His understanding of wildlife behavior had evolved from theoretical knowledge to practical experience gained through direct participation in animal society. The insights he was gaining challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence, social organization, and environmental adaptation. The rescued pup had become his most effective teacher in these areas, demonstrating through patient instruction the sophisticated reasoning capabilities that wolves possessed. Their communication methods had evolved to include complex information exchange about environmental conditions, resource availability, and potential threats that required planning and coordination. These educational exchanges were revealing cognitive abilities in wolves that exceeded anything in scientific literature. The animals demonstrated problem-solving skills, long-term planning capabilities, and abstract reasoning that approached human intellectual performance in many areas while exceeding it in others. Environmental awareness was particularly impressive. The wolves possessed detailed knowledge of ecosystem relationships that included understanding of weather patterns, seasonal changes, and species interactions that informed decision-making with remarkable precision. Their environmental intelligence could serve as foundation for ecosystem management approaches that transcended traditional human-centered conservation strategies. As winter began its gradual retreat from the mountain landscape, community activities shifted toward preparations for spring breeding seasons and territorial adjustments that accompanied changing environmental conditions. Michael was being included in planning sessions that addressed resource allocation and security considerations for the coming months. These planning processes revealed organizational sophistication that challenged conventional understanding of animal social structures. The community operated through consensus-building mechanisms that included extensive consultation among pack leaders, careful evaluation of resource availability, and contingency planning for various environmental scenarios. Michael's contributions to these planning efforts focused on long-term environmental trends and human activity patterns that could affect community security. His knowledge of ranger operations, tourist patterns, and development pressures provided information that helped the wolves make informed decisions about territorial usage and concealment strategies. But his most valuable contribution was probably his ability to interpret human intentions and predict likely responses to various wolf activities. This intelligence allowed the community to minimize conflicts while maximizing access to resources that existed within human-managed territories. The partnership was creating benefits that flowed in both directions. Michael's conservation work was becoming more effective as he gained understanding of ecosystem relationships from the animal perspective. His recommendations to wildlife management agencies were informed by insights that no traditional research could have provided. The rescued pup's development continued to exceed normal maturation patterns. The young wolf was demonstrating leadership qualities that suggested future roles extending far beyond typical pack positions. Its unique experience bridging human and wolf societies was preparing it for responsibilities that might include facilitating other interspecies partnerships. Their relationship had evolved into something approaching partnership between equals, with collaborative decision-making that honored both human planning capabilities and wolf environmental knowledge. The bond between them remained strong while adapting to their changing roles within community structures. As spring approached, the community began discussing expansion possibilities that could include contact with other wolf populations and potentially other human individuals who might be suitable for similar partnerships. The success of their initial experiment was encouraging exploration of broader cooperative possibilities. But expansion would require careful evaluation of candidates and circumstances to avoid creating dependencies or conflicts that could threaten existing relationships. The balance between openness and security that had enabled their success would need to be maintained as community boundaries evolved. Michael found himself serving as advisor for these expansion discussions, helping evaluate human populations and individuals who might be suitable for interspecies cooperation. His insights into human psychology and social dynamics were proving valuable for assessing partnership potential and avoiding conflicts that could endanger community security. The rescued pup participated actively in these planning sessions, contributing perspectives that reflected its unique understanding of both human and wolf social systems. Its advocacy for expansion was balanced by careful attention to security considerations that demonstrated remarkable strategic thinking for such a young animal. As the season progressed, evidence accumulated that their interspecies experiment was producing benefits that extended beyond immediate community welfare. Local ecosystem health was improving as human knowledge and wolf environmental management combined to create more effective conservation strategies. Prey populations were being managed more sustainably through hunting approaches that incorporated human understanding of population dynamics with wolf knowledge of individual animal behavior and health status. The results were more selective hunting that maintained ecosystem balance while ensuring adequate nutrition for community members. Habitat improvement projects were another area of successful cooperation. Human engineering capabilities combined with wolf environmental knowledge to create modifications that benefited multiple species while maintaining natural appearance that avoided detection by outside observers. These collaborative achievements were demonstrating that interspecies cooperation could produce conservation outcomes superior to traditional human-only management approaches. The implications for broader environmental protection efforts were staggering, suggesting possibilities for ecosystem restoration that transcended current capabilities. As spring fully established itself in the mountain landscape, Michael reflected on the remarkable year that had begun with a simple rescue and evolved into something that challenged fundamental assumptions about relationships between human and animal communities. The rescued pup pressed against his side as evening approached, its presence providing continuity between their original partnership and the expanded community relationships that continued to develop around them. Their bond remained central to his successful integration into wolf society, while serving as foundation for broader cooperative arrangements that seemed to expand with each passing season. The future held possibilities that seemed as vast and untamed as the wilderness that surrounded their thriving community, where the ancient boundaries between species continued to prove more permeable than anyone had ever imagined. Spring's full arrival brought changes that tested the strength and adaptability of the partnerships that had developed throughout the winter months. The mother wolf's return to complete health coincided with territorial adjustments as other pack groups responded to changing resource availability and the approaching breeding season. Michael watched with mixed emotions as the family prepared for their first major separation since the rescue. The three younger pups were ready to join extended pack activities that would take them away from the community for days at a time, while their mother assumed leadership roles that required travel to distant territories for negotiations with other groups. The rescued pup faced the most complex decisions of all. Its unique experience bridging human and wolf societies had prepared it for roles that existed nowhere in traditional pack hierarchies, creating opportunities and obligations that required careful consideration of long-term consequences. Michael found himself serving as advisor for these family decisions, helping evaluate options that balance traditional wolf social requirements with the unprecedented relationships that had developed during their crisis. His perspectives were valued and sought, demonstrating the depth of acceptance he had achieved within community structures. But advice giving also forced him to confront the reality that his deepest partnerships might require adjustments that challenged his own emotional attachments. The rescued pup's development toward adult responsibilities could mean reduced contact with a human who had become central to its survival and growth. The young wolf seemed to understand these emotional complexities, spending extended periods with Michael during the decision-making process. Their conversations had evolved to include subtle communications about futures that might diverge while honoring bonds that would persist regardless of physical proximity. These discussions revealed the depth of psychological connection that had developed between them. The rescued pup demonstrated understanding of Michael's emotional needs while expressing its own attachments and concerns about changing circumstances. Their relationship had transcended simple partnership to become something approaching friendship across species boundaries. Community preparations for spring dispersal included extensive planning for maintaining contact networks that would preserve cooperative relationships despite geographical separation. Michael's contributions to these communication protocols drew on his knowledge of human technology and organizational systems. Radio communication possibilities were explored, along with message relay systems that could maintain information flow across the extended territories that different pack groups would occupy during breeding and hunting seasons. The community was developing infrastructure that could support continued cooperation despite physical separation. But the most sophisticated communication systems relied on traditional wolf methods that had been enhanced through interspecies cooperation. Scent marking protocols were refined to carry more complex information, while howling patterns were developed to convey specific messages about resource availability, threats, and coordination needs. Michael's integration into these communication networks required learning skills that challenged human sensory limitations while drawing on capabilities that complemented wolf methods. The combination of human planning abilities with wolf sensory awareness was creating surveillance and information systems that exceeded either species' individual capabilities. As departure preparations intensified, Michael realized that his role within the community was evolving from participant to institutional resource. His knowledge and capabilities would be preserved and accessed by different pack groups as needed, rather than being tied to specific individuals or locations. This evolution reflected the community's sophisticated understanding of resource optimization. Human capabilities were valuable enough to be preserved and shared, but they needed to be integrated into wolf social structures in ways that enhanced rather than disrupted traditional patterns. The rescued pup would play a crucial role in this integration process, serving as primary liaison between Michael and various pack groups while maintaining its own development toward adult leadership responsibilities. Its unique preparation for bridging species differences made it ideally suited for these coordination roles. Michael's emotional preparation for these changes required accepting that successful interspecies cooperation might involve separations that challenge human attachment patterns while serving long-term community interests. The relationships he had formed were strong enough to survive physical distance while adapting to changing circumstances. The mother wolf's final medical examination revealed complete recovery from injuries that had once threatened her life. Her return to full health represented the successful conclusion of the crisis that had brought human and wolf together, while creating foundations for ongoing cooperation that transcended emergency circumstances. Her gratitude was expressed through behaviors that had become familiar during their extended partnership. Direct eye contact that conveyed complex emotional content, physical proximity that demonstrated trust, and protective positioning that acknowledged Michael as a valued pack member despite species differences. The three younger pups had developed their own relationships with Michael throughout their recovery process. Their interactions reflected the comfortable familiarity of siblings who had grown up with human presence as a natural part of their social environment. Their adaptation suggested possibilities for even deeper interspecies integration with future generations. As departure day approached, the entire community participated in farewell ceremonies that acknowledged the significance of partnerships formed during crisis, while expressing confidence in continued cooperation despite changing circumstances. These rituals demonstrated cultural sophistication that challenged conventional understanding of animal social capabilities. Michael's participation in these ceremonies marked his complete integration into community life. He was no longer an outsider who had provided temporary assistance, but a permanent member whose contributions would be remembered and whose welfare would be considered in future community decisions. The rescued pup's role in these ceremonies reflected its unique status as bridge between human and wolf communities. Its speeches, for lack of a better term for the complex vocalizations it delivered, seemed to honor both the partnerships formed during crisis and the expanded possibilities that those partnerships had created. When departure morning finally arrived, the leave-taking was emotional but confident. The bonds formed during crisis had proven strong enough to survive separation while creating networks of cooperation that would persist regardless of geographical distance. Michael stood beside the rescued pup as family members dispersed toward their respective territories, watching partnerships evolve into distributed networks that maintain connection while honoring changing needs. The community they had built together was adapting to serve broader purposes that extended far beyond their original sanctuary. The mother wolf paused before leaving, making final eye contact with Michael that conveyed gratitude, respect, and confidence in continued partnership despite physical separation. Her message was clear. The human who had saved her family would remain part of their extended pack regardless of distance or time. Her offspring followed with varying degrees of confidence, some pausing for final interactions while others moved forward with the enthusiasm of young animals eager for new adventures. Their comfort with human presence suggested possibilities for future cooperation that could expand interspecies relationships even further. The rescued pup remained behind as family members disappeared into the forest. Its decision to maintain primary partnership with Michael representing a choice between traditional wolf social patterns and unprecedented interspecies cooperation. The sacrifice involved in that choice was significant, but so were the possibilities it preserved. As the sounds of departure faded into forest silence, Michael contemplated the remarkable transformation that had occurred over the past months. The simple act of rescuing a drowning pup had evolved into something that challenged fundamental assumptions about relationships between human and animal communities. The rescued pup pressed against his side as they watched the last traces of family movement disappear among the trees. Their partnership had survived its first major test, while adapting to serve expanded purposes that seemed to grow with each passing season. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that remained as vast and untamed as the wilderness that surrounded them, where ancient boundaries between species continued to prove more permeable than anyone had ever imagined possible. The morning mist lifted slowly from the valley floor, revealing a landscape transformed by the gentle promise of summer. Michael stood beside the clear stream that wound through their territory, watching the rescued wolf, now fully grown and magnificent in its adult prime, test the morning air with the confident awareness that marked mature predators in their element. 2 years had passed since that desperate February rescue, time that had fundamentally altered both man and wolf, while creating a partnership that had become legendary among the scattered pack communities throughout the Rocky Mountain Preserve. The young pup who had once fought desperately against icy currents had evolved into a bridge between species that facilitated cooperation, extending far beyond their original sanctuary. Their daily routines had settled into patterns that honored both human and wolf requirements, while creating something entirely new in the natural world. Michael's ranger duties now included territories that he shared with pack communities who had learned to coordinate their activities with human conservation efforts. The results were producing ecosystem health improvements that exceeded anything in traditional wildlife management experience. The transformed relationship had attracted attention from researchers and conservationists who recognized that something unprecedented was occurring in the wilderness areas under Michael's supervision. Carefully managed visits from scientists were documenting interspecies cooperation that challenged fundamental assumptions about human-animal relationships while providing models for conservation approaches that transcended traditional boundaries. But the most profound changes were personal rather than professional. Michael had discovered aspects of himself that existed only in relationship with creatures who operated according to entirely different consciousness patterns. The rescued wolf had become his teacher in environmental awareness, social cooperation, and forms of intelligence that complemented rather than competed with human capabilities. Their communication methods had evolved into something approaching telepathy, with information exchange occurring through subtle cues that bypassed normal language limitations. Michael could sense the wolf's emotional states, physical condition, and intentions with accuracy that seemed impossible, yet proved consistently reliable in practical situations. The wolf demonstrated similar awareness of Michael's needs and concerns, often providing comfort and companionship during difficult periods while maintaining the independence that kept their partnership balanced and healthy. Their relationship honored both species' distinctive characteristics while creating bonds that transcended normal predator-prey dynamics. Regular visits from the rescued wolf's family had become events that Michael anticipated with joy. The mother wolf, now silver-muzzled and dignified in her maturity, continued to greet him with the trust and affection that had developed during their crisis partnership. Her 3 offspring, dispersed throughout the territory in their own pack relationships, brought their cubs to meet the human who had become legendary in wolf social networks. These multi-generational connections were creating cultural transmission patterns that embedded interspecies cooperation into wolf community traditions. Young wolves grew up with stories about the human who had saved their grandmother's family, learning that cooperation across species boundaries was possible and beneficial under appropriate circumstances. Michael's own professional development had evolved in directions that would have seemed impossible before his partnership with the rescued wolf. His conservation work now incorporated wolf environmental knowledge that provided insights no human research could have achieved. His reports to wildlife management agencies included information gathered through interspecies cooperation that was revolutionizing approaches to ecosystem management. Government recognition of their work had come gradually, with initial skepticism giving way to grudging acceptance as results demonstrated benefits that couldn't be ignored. Michael had been designated as lead researcher for an experimental interspecies cooperation program that was attracting international attention from conservationists seeking solutions to human-wildlife conflicts. But recognition also brought pressures that threatened the organic development that had made their partnership successful. Outside interest in documenting and replicating their relationship required careful management to prevent disruption of delicate balances that had taken years to develop and maintain. The rescued wolf seemed to understand these external pressures, often providing protection from overly intrusive observers while facilitating interactions that served broader conservation purposes. Its intelligence and social skills had developed to include sophisticated understanding of human political dynamics and media management requirements. Recent months had brought the most significant test of their partnership's resilience. Federal agencies had proposed expanding their experimental program to include other ranger stations and wolf populations, a development that could provide tremendous benefits for conservation while potentially diluting the unique characteristics that made their relationship special. Michael and his wolf partner had spent long hours discussing these possibilities, evaluating potential benefits against risks to the intimate cooperation that had become central to both their lives. Their decision-making process honored both individual preferences and broader conservation responsibilities while maintaining focus on long-term ecosystem welfare. The choice they reached reflected the maturity that their partnership had achieved over 2 years of shared challenges and successes. They would support careful expansion that honored the principles they had discovered while maintaining their own relationship as a model and resource for others attempting similar cooperation. As afternoon approached, Michael found himself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had begun with an impulsive rescue and evolved into something that challenged fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between human and animal consciousness. The simple act of pulling a drowning pup from an icy river had led to discoveries about cooperative possibilities that seemed to expand with each passing season. The rescued wolf settled beside him as his reflections deepened, its presence providing the comfort and companionship that had become essential elements of his daily experience. Their partnership had survived crisis, growth, separation, and reunion while adapting to serve purposes that extended far beyond their individual needs. Evening brought the return of pack members who had been hunting in distant valleys, their success evident in their relaxed demeanor and the fresh scent of successful cooperation. Michael was greeted with a casual acceptance that marked his complete integration into community life, acknowledged as a valuable pack member whose contributions were appreciated without fanfare. The rescued wolf moved among its kin with the confidence of an animal who had successfully balanced traditional pack relationships with unprecedented interspecies partnerships. Its unique experience continued to serve as bridge between communities, facilitating understanding and cooperation that benefited all participants. As darkness settled over the landscape, Michael prepared for sleep, surrounded by the gentle sounds of a community that had learned to bridge ancient gaps between species while honoring the distinctive gifts that each brought to their shared survival efforts. The future remained filled with possibilities for expanded cooperation that seemed as vast as the wilderness that surrounded their thriving partnership. The rescued wolf settled beside Michael's sleeping bag with the comfortable familiarity of a companion who had shared dangers, discoveries, and dreams that transcended normal relationships between human and animal. Their bond had become proof that the boundaries between species were more permeable than anyone had imagined, opening possibilities for cooperation that continued to evolve with each passing day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But tonight, they could rest together in the knowledge that they had discovered something precious and transformative in the harsh wilderness. A partnership that honored both human consciousness and wolf wisdom, while creating something entirely new under the ancient stars that watched over their unprecedented experiment in interspecies cooperation. The gentle rhythm of wolf breathing mixed with mountain wind through the pines, creating a lullaby that spoke of connections extending far beyond the boundaries that had once seemed absolute between the civilized and the wild.